Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast presented to you by Texas Pete. I'm Connor O'Gara. Well, my goodness, what a day of college football we got. What a weekend of college football we got. A Michigan-Washington national championship is straight out of 1995. No SEC team in a national championship for the first time since 2014, which we will get to. Obviously, all the ramifications of that, the thriller of Michigan outlasting Bama in overtime. But here we are, wild weekend. How are we doing? You're in Austin right now. How are the vibes in Austin?
Vibes are amazing. Having a good time as always. I found a way to catch like every bowl game that I wanted to catch, including the start of games like the Tennessee game where you go, well, this is not a game. I could go do something else. But yeah, I think that it's been perfect. I love actually the timing of bowl season this year. Something I will very rarely credit anyone related to the college football playoff apparatus about his awareness. I think that this is a time when I didn't feel like, okay, I'm balancing my New Year's Eve plans. I feel like New Year's is such a perfect day to just hunker down. I started off New Year's Day on like in a Wisconsin bar, funny enough, because our regular bar was closed. Walked in, realized it was a Wisconsin bar, realized I did not need to be in a Wisconsin bar, found a Cajun restaurant that was showing the games. It was awesome. So like point being, the vibes are just immaculate right now. This is, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but this was, as we keep saying, the end of like old school college football. And I feel like we've really enjoyed it. I feel like it's been a really fun watch. I feel like I took the time to be deliberate and really enjoy the moment and the good old days, as Andy Bernard once said.
How do you know the good old days when you're in them? I wish there was a way to know the good old days when you're in them. For some people, these were the good old days. For others, these are the days that they can't wait to move on from. But we're going to get to all the SEC bowl games. That's the plan today. If you're looking at the length of this pod, yes, this is a bit long. We're just going to treat this like a typical Sunday pod that we would do during the season. So tons and tons of things to get to. Obviously, we got to start with the Rose Bowl. Well, an instant classic. Michigan knocks off Alabama. I try not to be this guy. I really try not to be this guy. And do not take what I'm about to say as something where I'm trying to discredit Michigan. I'm not trying to do it. JJ McCarthy shut me up. Michigan had 10 TFL, 6 sacks in this game. Just kept responding time and time again. The toughness in a game in which everybody is waiting for Michigan to fail just so that they can laugh at them. We can make our Connor Stallions jokes. They did not do that, and Michigan deserves all the credit in the world for that. But oh my gosh, I hated that final play call from Alabama with the season on the line. Oh, I hated it. And look, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't. Maybe I wanted to be right about Bama for a brief second in time. I thought, 24-20. That final score, that Marler pick that I just piggybacked on betting the Bulls, shameless plug. Look, maybe it's going to hit, and maybe that'd be kind of cool to get on these airwaves and say that I perfectly nailed this. No, I know we play the results. I get that. We play the results in this business. That is what we do. Even Saban admitted that it wasn't a good play call because it didn't work. So he's playing the results by saying that. Okay? He is. Here's what I hated about it. I went back and watched it over and over and over just to try and make sense of all the different pieces. And you can look at all the different angles. The beat reporters, I saw Mike Rodak had the unique angle of it from the side, essentially from like kind of the pylon end zone camera look. Alabama
After
fans
all that
don't
didn't make any sense. Did it make more sense at the end? Because it still doesn't make sense to me.
Nope. Just made less and less sense. It did.
Right.
So if you didn't see this or you just forgot about it, Bama needed 3 yards to keep the season alive to try and tie the game in overtime. I don't think they would have gone for 2 in that spot, but you never know. It was essentially an attempt to try and tie the game to keep the game going to force a second overtime. You have an interior offensive line that has had issues all night, whether it was simply snapping a football, something that, look, we take for granted in this game. I think we do, but when you see it don't work time and time again, like Alabama did, you learn to not take it for granted.
That poor gentleman. It felt like, it's New Year's, but one specific gentleman was living in Halloween, and it was that center for Alabama. You saw him turning redder as each thing. He started off, pretty like pasty standard Caucasian gentleman. once he got the talking to from Nick Saban, he hit an all-time new color too.
Seth McLaughlin was not going to turn into Barrett Jones. We knew
Yeah.
that. That did not happen in that game. So you know that, right? You know
Yeah.
that Bama's having all these different issues. They're not winning that battle in the trenches. They just had not been. And they tried to split Michigan out wide and have this design quarterback run for Jalen Milroe. And it was going to be a quarterback run no matter what. Okay.
Yep.
But he's taking the snap at essentially like the 8-yard line. And if you had watched the way that he had been fielding snaps all night, I don't know what the right way to phrase this was, but he had no idea where the ball was coming. Okay. He reacted truly like he was on the defense or something. Like if you were sitting 5 yards in front of a jugs machine and trying to catch footballs and you have no idea where it's going to be, that was essentially Jalen Milroe fielding snaps last night. So you know those things. And you know that if he's fielding that snap on the 8-yard line and you don't have a lead blocker in that spot, and Michigan had what was, I think, 7 defenders in the box. They had an 8th defender in the box, but he was rotating out because the running back in motion and he had picked him up. So essentially, you're outmanned. You're outmanned going into this, and you haven't won hat on hat. You haven't won that battle. Yeah, the rushing numbers would suggest, oh, Bama actually, did just fine.
But
Watch
if you had eyeballs.
Yes. If you had working eyeballs, they told you that Michigan was winning that battle up front. And I agreed with the decision to say Jalen Milroe's legs had to be part of that final play. If they had just run a goal line fade a la Jimbo Fisher a couple years ago against Bama and Tuscaloosa, everybody would have dogged that decision too. So you didn't do that if you're Tommy Rees. That's the good news. The bad news is that you're essentially hoping and praying that you get a perfect snap, which you didn't, because anything that sets Jalen Milroe back in that spot, that's going to be an automatic negative play. He fields the snap low. I did the screenshot of it, which you can see on Twitter. And it's, again, low, just as it had been all night, just as it had been all year. And it's like just above his ankles. And so he takes a first step back with his left foot. And his left foot is about on the 9-yard line. And Michigan had great pressure up front, great pressure in the interior. And so Milroe essentially has no chance of making that play work. And this play operating like a Joe Burrow quarterback draw was what Alabama had essentially hoped for. And Milroe has been so good running up the gut. He's not a scramble to the outside runner, beat you to the edges type of guy. He is a step up through the pocket, make you miss in space. He's a little bit craftier than he probably gets credit for. So you were banking on that if you were Bama. But when you got a fastball at your foot and you are trying to do something that you haven't really done that well all night without additional help, it was a play that was set up to fail. It was.
Yeah.
And you ran at the strength of the Michigan defense, and it did not work. It wasn't the original play call, apparently, because Bama had an original play call that Michigan called timeout for, and Michigan didn't like what it had set up. Saban said as much afterwards.
Like what they saw in film.
Didn't like it. And then you had to keep going. Oh, God, I see where you went there. I just totally blew right past that. And Michigan had the right play call at the end, and they snuffed that out. And that call will follow Tommy Rees as long as he's at Alabama. As great as he did of understanding this offense and figuring out the strengths of Jalen Milroe, that call is going to haunt him. It's going to haunt Alabama fans for a really, really long time. I would have loved to have known what the first play call was, and I would have loved to have seen that play out. But that's not the way that this game works. That's not the way that this happened. The chess game ultimately went in favor of Michigan. What were your thoughts, besides probably just a cackle of laughter when you saw that play that was drawn up by Tommy Rees?
So I think you hit the nail on the head. You were actually the first person I saw that screen grabbed how low that snap was. And what reminded me of all night is the way that Jalen Hurts catches snaps on the Eagles. And the reason for that is that Jason Kelsey is known to just fire the snap off like a fastball, but it's always in the same position. This dude was like that catching curveballs. Like it was like every play started with a reception, even if it was a run play. It was like, oh, you got to make a reception, then you got to do something. So I'm completely with you there. I think that at the end of the day, like, let me say this first. I think you're totally right. They had a different play call to start off with. I think wisely calling a timeout, getting everyone to call the good plays, right? And then you say, well, you can't come out in the same look because then they kind of know what they're expecting. They can call a play off of what I showed them, right? And I think that at the end of the day, like not to play the results, but this is a little bit of that Tommy Rees, younger guy. What this looks like is when you're playing NCAA and you're like, oh, choose by play type, quarterback run. 1, this one. And it's like, dude, this is the most non-creative QB power up the middle. Like when you talked about Barrow running, I love that example because what they used to do with Barrow, he would come out in almost empty. He would come out with 5 receivers in the shotgun to where you had to spread the defense out and at least not anticipate Joe Burrow running up the middle. Almost everybody in that stadium knew it was about to be a middle row run, given how poorly the offensive line had played, and that at that point, that was their only consistent offensive ability. Now, that being said, there are a billion ways to get there, right? There are a billion ways to get there, and not to just talk about LSU, but I think Jaden Daniels did a great job of that this year where it was not QB power. It was not a QB run call that everyone saw coming. It was, let's get this guy moving sideline to sideline. Let's do a little bit of an RPO. Let's have him read the DN. Let's have him look at the linebackers, decide if he can beat those people with his feet, and then maybe get a play going. And I'll say this. I've been saying for literally months at this point, they need to unlock Jalen Milroe as a runner within this offense. I'm not going to turn that around and say, that was bad advice. And it's ultimately what got them to that position was they finally were just like, all right, Milroe is going to run. I will say that, like, you have a guy in Isaiah Bond who's been here over and over and over again. You have these plays, and so few of them are QB power. So many of them are Jalen Milroe actually making the right decision, putting the ball where his guy can see it, even in spots where it doesn't make a ton of sense, even in spots where it's 4th down, in the SC championship game, where it's Isaiah Bond 4th and 31 at the end of the Auburn game. You've put the ball in this guy's hands as a passer in these big moments. If you decide to remove that element and make him just a running back, and it's like, dude, what we've said on the podcast this whole time is that he's not that. We've seen him regress a little bit in the last couple of weeks as a passer, but that is still in him. He still has that confidence. He still has the ability to make the big play, and that's how Alabama's kept their season alive. And I think it is a little bit interesting from a play call standpoint that they didn't trust their guys who have made that play over and over and over again.
And didn't have a lead blocker in the backfield because you want to try and spread Michigan out. You want as empty of a box as possible. Get it from that standpoint. Still think that if it's a fake to the right and then you've got a lead blocker in the backfield, you're able to give him a little bit more of a sense of direction of, all right, I can read this guy. You could have whoever you feel like is best suited in that spot, Jan Miller, Roydell Williams. Roydell Williams was the back that split out wide in that spot. But yeah, look, there are a lot of different ways to look at that game, and it wasn't just that one play. Obviously, that play is going to live in infamy for Alabama. There are other things that led us to that point, of course. Like if Deontay Lawson gets more of a hand on that ball with 2 minutes left, I don't know how in the world that continued to be a spiral on that play, a play that I thought Malachi Moore had picked off. And I think even the camera person thought that he had picked that play off as well. And I think it was Roman Wilson who ended up catching that. And on that final drive that Michigan had to be able to roar back and tie it up in regulation after they hadn't trailed in a second half all year, that was the type of stuff where you're like, all right, Bama had a chance to be able to put its foot on the gas and to close the door. That punt, the way that it happened, I couldn't believe that guy muffed the punt. Michigan special teams issues. Oh my goodness. I mean, Michigan having repeated special teams issues in that game. Bama special teams actually kept them in it to be able to have a chance in overtime. And Will Reichard, my God, I mean, the stones on that kid, how clutch he was, put him in this spot. And I thought Bama did some great things in the second half to be able to adjust on both sides of the ball after Michigan dominated that game in the first half and should have probably had a bigger lead. And Bama probably had to feel fortunate that, like, wait a minute, we get the ball out of half. We're only down 3 points in the spot. Like, this is pretty advantageous. We've done this. We're the team that's trailed at halftime more than any Saban era coach team. This is kind of what we do, and this is our bread and butter. And so I thought that Bama was going to be able to put it away. And then when you see that Michigan drive, you're just like, oh man, Michigan is they're at a different place. This ain't the Michigan that we saw the last 2 years. They have grown up. They have figured things out. They bullied Alabama, and they deserve all the credit in the world for winning that game. And we saw Bama's flaws come to the surface. That's what it was. You talk about the lack of trust on that final play in those receivers. Bama never really found those guys on the outside. They never really did. And like for all the talk that we've had about the plethora of weapons, if they had that guy, do they maybe turn to him in that spot? Could they have relied on that guy to just get that big chunk play to make life a little bit easier? Maybe. It didn't really seem like the
if only the
downfield
version
passing
that exists of Jermaine Burton in his own head were real. If Jermaine Burton was that guy he thought he was, buddy, he would not have had 4 catches for 21 yards in a semifinal loss. Yeah, be that guy. This is what we keep saying about Jermaine Burton. Is like, dude, if you think you're awesome, if you think you want to talk trash all the time, go put up 100. Win your team the game. Let's do it, dude.
They talked about him breaking off that route that set up the play, to the final play of the game, where if he runs a little bit deeper, does he get to the end zone? Does he get to the one? Like at a place where yards are such a premium, like just the little things like that in that game felt so significant. And you know, it truly was a game of inches that could have gone any which way. I mean, like JJ McCarthy had a pass that could have been picked off on that final drive where he just tried to throw it through a bunch of Bama defenders in their own territory. Like Bama picks off that pass, game is essentially over. Like there are a lot of different little what ifs that we'll look back on in that game. But ultimately, Michigan was a tougher team. Michigan was the tougher team. They could have wilted in the second half when it felt like the game was totally slipping away. A little bit of deja vu for them. And they, to me, showed over the course of that game, hey, I think this is Michigan's year. I just when you show up and do things like that in that spot, to me that says you have exceeded, you have gotten over whatever sort of hump mental hurdle that was standing in your way, that was in your way, preventing you from beating TCU last year. We're going to have national championship coverage later in the week on our Thursday pod that'll come out Friday. So we'll dig into that more so. But yeah, Harbaugh finally being able to win a bowl game for the first time since 2015, in doing so in that fashion, like it's the type of stuff that Michigan fans have just been dreaming of since 1997, and it finally happened, and they have an opportunity now to win their first undisputed national championship since when? When? Do you know that answer?
Undisputed? Oh gosh, the 70s?
Oh, they wish. They wish.
Sorry, trying to be nice here. Yeah.
Well, we got to go back to 1948. Yeah, who could forget?
Huh.
Is that the Truman administration? I think it's the Truman administration.
That Eisenhower? After, I think Eisenhower, right? At that point.
No, I think it's got to be Truman. It's got to be Truman because the Eisenhower administration goes to 60, right? And then that's when Kennedy takes over. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I think that was still Truman. Yeah.
Yeah. We're just talking presidents here on a recap pod. No big deal. So yeah, that moment for Michigan, you could tell, I mean, all over the place. It is Michigan against the world, whatever you want to call it. They played their hand the best way that they possibly could have. Blake Corum is just a freaking stud, and they deserve to be able to win that game. Any other thoughts on the Michigan side and exercising demons that have been just hovering over this program basically since Charles Woodson left?
Yeah, I think, from Woodrow Wilson to Charles Woodson, no, but I think that's very interesting. Like it was a very rare up and down performance against Alabama, right? Because usually when a team beats Alabama, a lot of those things, like most, if not almost all of those things go their way. For Michigan, I mean, they started the game throwing what we thought was an interception on the first play. They immediately muffed a punt. It felt like Michigan was so overwhelmed so early. But then, let me say this. Let me be fair. No. The second that Alabama had to block someone, it looked like Michigan had a shot because they never figured it out. The last play was indicative of that. They never figured it out. And not to dog on the last play again, but all of that was such a culmination, a perfect kind of, ornament or star at the top of the Christmas tree for this one, because it was a little bit of that arrogance of, I know we haven't blocked you all night, but we're going to block you this time. And it's like, no, I mean, it wasn't like a typical, Michigan got scared and they stayed scared. It was the fact that they kept reaching back up and trying. And I think that often in these games, these teams will turtle, and you got to no, this is even more grit my teeth than Nick Saban. You got to credit Jim Harbaugh for a great coaching job here because at the end of the day, I mean, so many teams like it's. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's a lot more attainable or plausible or possible to beat Alabama when you do what Texas did, where everything is working, where you're LSU in 2019, and yeah, they're punching back, but you got Joe Burrow, you're cooking, you're doing whatever. The couple of plays that you highlighted, I think, were such a perfect summation of the game, which is the Roman Wilson catch that looked like on the reverse angle when you see kind of the safety like prowling for the ball, how the ball slightly curves into the receiver's hands and the receiver also goes up perfectly and high points it. I mean, you immediately think in the first angle, how did he just not get laid out? It was because the DB was 95% sure it was a pick until it wasn't. Like, he did not even make the attempt to lower his shoulder. He did not try because he was like, oh, this is the ball game. This is it. I'm about to make a play, win the game. So that was so massive. I think we can talk about Blake Corum on fourth down, but I think that ultimately that weird little like sassy exchange at the end of like, oh, I'm going to call a timeout. Oh, well, no, actually, we're going to kill the clock. No, now we're going to kick it back to you. No, we're going to call a timeout so we can field the punt with 40 seconds left. It's like, bro, they literally did that to get that possession. Could have lost themselves the possession on the punt at 42 seconds remaining in regulation or whatever. And the presence of mind for that kid to fumble, to not corral the ball, and then to just understand all of Newton's laws at once and just be like, I can't even, if I'm going into that end zone, you guys need to carry me kicking and screaming. Do not make one iota of movement toward the end zone. It's not there. It's lava. I'm just going to fall in this ball and die, not fumble the ball. Because that was another option. He could have just fumbled and it could have been over. But, like, let me stop my momentum so perfectly on this dime. Maybe Michigan is a higher institution of learning. Who knows? But that guy paid attention in class. He was set. He was ready to go. So, yeah, like, I'll give them credit. Like I said, it's one thing to have everything go your way, but it's another to just keep fighting, keep battling. And, yeah, and on the other end of it, I think you're about to transition into this. But it's like, you know, on one hand, you could be fair and say, well, this is kind of one of the worst, you know, Saban teams. It's easily the best Jim Harbaugh team, and they were pretty evenly matched. But on the other hand of it, it's like to overcome that, to have never been there before, it's so freaking hard. We've seen these great coaches bump into this wall. Kirby Smart, his first playoff appearance, you know, against Alabama, like it's until you've actually done it, doing it feels so unattainable. And to have this whole year of scandal, to have a 1-4 matchup that everybody counted them out. I counted them out. You counted them out. I mean, the three of us, me and you and Marla, are exactly the same page. The time that trio was wrong is this. This is it. So I'll give them credit for overcoming all the doubters, because it didn't look like they were this super dominant, beat Alabama down team. It was like they had to really dig within themselves, and that makes this win 10 times more impressive to me.
I think this year, even though Bama will miss a national championship berth for just the sixth time in the last 15 seasons, I think it showed simply that predictions of Alabama's demise were premature. And look, you can think that this wasn't really a good Alabama team to begin with. That's fine. It's still a team that was able to end the Georgia winning streak, was able to win the SEC, and get to this place, a college football playoff, something that there are so many fan bases across the country that knew how unattainable that was in the 14 playoff era. And that conversation is going to shift as the field triples next year. But Bama missed out on a chance to give the SEC just the most massive flex, because, Will, the SEC started 4-1 against the Big Ten in bowl season. And and we'll get to the Maryland Auburn game later, the lone Big Ten dub to that point. But if SEC teams had beat the likes of Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Iowa, those narratives would have been everywhere. I'm not one for sweeping generalizations about conferences based on bowl performances, especially during the opt-out portal era. I think it makes less and less sense. But that whole discussion for the SEC would have just been so unbelievably one-sided, and this would have just been SEC fans flexing nonstop and Big Ten fans missing on a golden opportunity. But instead, as it stands, the flexing will be kept at a minimum, because no SEC team in the national championship, again, for the first time since the first year of the 14 playoff, when, ironically enough, Bama lost to a different Big Ten team, Ohio State. This is just the second time in the post-Matt Leinart, Vince Young national championship era in which there will not be an SEC team in the national championship. And that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That is crazy. If that fuels some, to borrow the Jalen Milroe word, naysayers to say that the SEC is dead or that the conference is hurt, I would definitely push back on that just a bit. And just because recent history would suggest, well, you had 8 consecutive years after 2014 in which the SEC made it to a national championship with at least one team in there, and then sometimes obviously having 2 teams in there. But, it is interesting because I'm wondering now if this was just a year in which 7 teams could have won a national championship. If that's what we had thought going into conference championship weekend, like I'm including a healthy Florida State, Georgia, obviously, who we're going to get to in a second here, and Oregon, along with the 4 playoff teams. I think it's fair to say after the way
Not
that
Ohio
those playoff
State, Connor?
teams,
You don't think they're a championship team?
No, I don't, Will. And I say that as a person who picked Ohio State to win a national championship in the preseason. But no, I don't think Ohio State belongs in that group. But if you just look at the fact that there were probably 7 teams that could have won it all, and there were a variety of scenarios that could have played out. In some alternate universe, Bama could have won a national championship. It's not to say that Michigan would have won this matchup every single time, but in this scenario, wherein we saw Bama's flaws, it was a reminder that this year has felt wide open. It has felt like there are so many different teams that have shown you different things to make you doubt them, to make you believe in them. And Bama's just part of that. That's just what this comes down to. And I think that this is made for a really fun year. And if we're talking about national interest of the sport, this is kind of a good result in that way. And I know that SEC fans listening to this are going to push back. They're going to say, I don't really care about that. I don't really care about the national popularity of the sport, all those different things. If you look at that map of national champions, where they're located since essentially post classic 2005 season.
Since the Bush administration.
Since the Bush administration, you're exactly right. That's George, not HW. But we're talking about a very regional sport that is going to have a much different feel in the national championship without a team south of the Mason-Dixon represented. You can say that's good. You can say you don't care about that. There are a lot of people that will say that's good, and that's the silver lining of Bama and Texas both losing their semifinal matchups. But sets up for a really interesting national championship. It very much does. And this season for the SEC, it is strange that it has already come to a close and came to a close before the national championship, not with like a loss to Clemson or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because you could have argued that 95% of like kind of the hay was in the barn for us to slander the Big Ten. But now, unfortunately, they get to pull the move that the SEC pulled in like 2021, where it's like, well, yeah, but both of the teams in the championship are going to be Big Ten teams next year. So we're not worried about the Cotton Bowl. We're playing for championships here in the Big Ten. And that kills me because it's so untrue, but it's such an easy spin because it's exactly what the SEC did. It was like, well, yeah, our 2 best teams are in the playoff. We're not worried about these next tier bowl games. We've got stuff to do. And obviously, Washington was a Pac-12 team. It's so funny because it's almost like the existing Pac-12 would rather not claim Washington right now. So it's like everyone's just kind of like handshake. You know what? You're a Big Ten team. We don't want to think about you anymore.
The Big Ten had a lawsuit with Michigan, Will. The Big Ten was involved in a lawsuit over the Harbaugh suspension. And of course, that's the team that gets to represent the Big Ten. Good move by the Big Ten to not just ultimately try and kick Michigan out of a chance of winning a national championship. In hindsight, you know what? It worked out for all parties.
Yeah, I think that, I don't think it's good leadership by any means, but I think that it's like maybe the ends did justify it because at the end of the day, Michigan's still kind of in the boat with the Big Ten. They're not angry at them, but it's like the Big Ten had to try to do something, which is what they did. They were like, we're going to suspend you again, and we're going to look into this, so watch out. It's like, yeah, but we gotta see it play out, and I'm sure there's a lot of pending investigations. I won't speak on that yet, but there's a lot going on out there in Michigan. I think we have a championship to preview, so there's a lot more to talk about there. But I will say this: this will be my last thing. This has got to be then again we can go into this more. This has got to be the lowest talent composite matchup in modern history because Michigan's 14 and they're the high one.
Easily,
yeah. Washington's 26. If your team had a 26th grade recruited class, you would want your coach fired. If you're pretty much anyone but like 3 teams in the SEC, that's so funny to me that it's like these guys. Okay. Pretend I'm not crediting Jim Harbaugh. They have overcome adversity. I will give them that at Michigan. And at Washington, goodness, man, like that's a team that we've been on this whole time. Michael Penix has been so awesome. And it just goes to show, like, they keep playing these teams with more talent. They keep playing these teams with, like, whatever. And these dudes from Sioux Falls, this coaching staff is just like, you've never seen us before. You don't know what we are. We're like the faceless man. You don't have any tape on us. This coaching tree from like high school or whatever, you can't stop us. It's been super cool. This is actually really fun. It's funny that you talk about this, and it's completely true that the 1 seed beating the 4 seed feels like this huge upset and shift in college football. But it is wild that Michigan survived that one. And Washington is, even though they're in their second berth, right? They also played Alabama the first time, so it never really felt like they were there. This time it feels real. They feel like they belong too.
Well, we had never seen in the playoff era a team outside of the top 10 in talent composite beat a team inside of the top 10 of the talent composite in a playoff game. And it happened twice. It happened twice last night.
Yep.
So that means that we're going to have, for the first time in the playoff era, since this became a thing, 2015, a team outside of the top 10 in talent composite win a national championship. And that kind of bucks the trend that I've been talking about. I've always kind of defaulted to that a little bit, and I'll say stars matter. I still think you would rather have more 5 stars on your roster than not. But at the same time, yeah, really bold. I prefer talent. That's just me. Maybe I'm in the minority. I don't like 2 stars as much as I like 5 stars. I don't know. I guess that just makes me crazy. But
what
it
if
is
5-star hearts, Connor.
That changes things. I see. That's if you got a 5-star heart and you're doing this thing brick by brick, I'm going to give you credit, benefit of the doubt every single time. But yeah, the fact that we're going to have 2 teams that are not necessarily locking down top 3, top 4 recruiting classes on a yearly basis, maybe there is something to be taken from that in this new era of the sport that we're getting into, because also we had TCU happen last year. So 3 of the 4 national championship teams that we've had in the last 2 seasons have not been top 10 teams in talent composite. So maybe I need to evolve my thinking a little bit. My adapt or die mindset suggests that there could be a changing of the guard in the sport. Like I said, we'll have a lot more coverage on that later in the week. And then we'll obviously we're going to recap the national championship next week as well. Speaking of talent, oh boy, the Orange Bowl, Will. Look, this wasn't a football game. This was just a narrative bowl. That's all this was. I realize Orange Bowl that gets the name. This was the narrative bowl, because if you wanted to push a narrative, you had plenty of time to push it, even if you didn't watch a second of this game. And I don't blame you if you didn't watch a second of this game.
Dude, let me pause right there. I'm so glad you started with this. The fact that everything was so predictable, I feel like we followed into that like NFL like take economy that I always joke about, where it's like people were literally saying after those games that Bama didn't deserve to be there. And it's like, dude, are you serious, dog? Like, are you serious? Like, you have an opinion and people care about what you say, and you wrote that down. And like, same thing here. It's like, hey, man, like if you're Georgia, be proud of your culture, be proud of all that stuff. If you're sitting there talking about Kirby and top 5 wins and stuff like that, like, stop, bro. Like, we can see through this stuff. We can see you. Like Cap Williams said, like, whatever people are saying, you can see exactly what's going to happen. I'm glad you dialed in on that, because so much of this was just like bad faith, you know?
Okay, so let's start with the lazy narratives. There are some lazy narratives, and you kind of hit on one just there. Florida State playing the way that it did not justify what the selection committee did to leave out an undefeated team because of its quarterback. Okay, FSU would have had a drastically different team on the field had it been playing. So let's separate those 2 things. Or if you just want to stick to your narrative, I guess you don't have to separate those 2 things. They're one and the same. Florida State getting whipped by Georgia meant that Florida State should have made the college football playoff. At the same time, did Kirby Smart dominate Mike Norvell in the culture debate? Yes, absolutely. Georgia had guys like Kamari Lassiter, who literally, he had his own mother saying, don't play in this game. And he's like, nah, I'm still going to play. I'm still going to play.
Got too much Georgia in me, Paul.
You can't take the red and black out of me. I'm going to be out there on that football field. Ladd McConkey was barely healthy all year. Declared for the NFL draft.
That game got her. I saw it, was like, oh my God. They were beating these people to sleep. They don't want to leave anyone on the bench.
Well, if you didn't watch this game, the only thing that I would have to say as to like what was just a perfect representation was watching Ladd take that busted trick play on what was supposed to be a receiver pass a la Chris Doring SEC championship. And instead, Ladd McConkey says, oh, you know what? My guy's not open. He's actually being held. They missed a blatant hold on that play. Let me just take this ball here from the opposite hash, make one cut in space, get upfield, and scamper into the end zone. The fact that he did that was like in The Longest Yard when they fumble about 6 different times and they're still able to waltz in for a score. And you're just like, okay, come on. What this is like a movie created scene here. This shouldn't be this lopsided. Surely there's no way that you would be able to have this many breakdowns and somebody would find a way to tackle this guy. This was so
great. Yeah, like the walk on, not walk on, but like the Ryan Gosling of this thing is to just walk the trick play in. Okay, man, after all this, Lad McConkey's the one out there doing this.
Yeah, right. Tell me about it. But this was just, again, not a football game. This was a national championship caliber team against what looked like an FCS team. When Jackson Muschamp is out there balling, you know it's a rout. Okay. What a moment for Will Muschamp. What a moment for him. So cool. Also, what a moment for me with my most liked tweet ever, tweeting out that clip. Thank you. Big old pat on the back. Yeah. Big moment for all of us. Other lazy narrative. Bowl games are dead because of what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
No, they are not dead, but this did not help. It did not help. It didn't help sell a quality product. Kirby said afterwards something needs to change and was very much like, I'm gonna give some pretty transparent thoughts about the build up. Kirby did not mince words whatsoever. He laid it all out there. The good news for Kirby and for others that watched this game and said this can't happen again, the 12-team playoff is going to take care of that game. It's going to take care of that game. That is going to change moving forward because the gap between meaningful bowl game and player interest is not going to be this big. Not in the Orange Bowl. Not in a game that's going to be a playoff game. But at the same time,
to be fair though, they would replace that game with Georgia Liberty, but it had just been that game. So,
but nobody's opting out of that game. That's totally different. We don't. No. Nobody's opting out of that game. For people saying like, "Oh, we're going to have a bunch of guys opt out of the playoff,"
no, that's insane.
I don't think we will. It's going to be, maybe we'll have the occasional Nick Bosa case. People kind of forget that. Jackson Smith and Jigba. If you want to talk about guys that definitely sat when they probably could have come back and still risked injury, but I don't think that we're going to get opt outs of playoff games. But so. All right, let's dig into this a little bit because a lot of people have already, and I've got some thoughts. Kirby's saying that something needs to be fixed. We always say don't present a problem without providing a solution. A player union would have bowl games as part of a contract. As we know, player unions don't exist because the NCAA refuses to treat student athletes as employees. We know how that's played out. Long, drawn-out battle. Could we get that in place in the pay-for-play era? Yes. In theory, yes. If you hated this and you said, this shouldn't happen, this isn't the college football I know and love, you should be in favor of a player union that outlines the murkiness of a bowl game. That would be a positive step in that direction to making sure that as many guys as possible could be playing this. I don't think the fix moving forward is the transfer portal. I think it's fair to say the transfer portal has played a huge part in what bowl games have turned into, but and I realize this is an unpopular opinion, I think that fixing the transfer portal is entirely different than just snapping your fingers and saying, well, we'll just move it back. It really doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that because when these guys want to be able to enroll, the practices that they can be able to take advantage of, you can't do this post-spring. You need to be able to try and get ahead of this now. And if coaches are able to leave and get out of their contracts now, then players are going to do the exact same thing. And also, like, this is, would I rather see guys out there that are playing for a lot, the underclassmen, as opposed to guys that maybe have a foot out the door and are like, I'm already looking at my next place. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to hurt my value in the portal. Yeah, I would rather see the guys that are out there, even if it's not, they're not, as talented. And that's maybe too blanket of a statement. But I just think some of these teams look totally unprepared. And the fix to that is moving back or just getting rid of the early signing period. That you see teams that are totally unprepared. Hugh Freeze talked about this as well, about there's just so much other stuff that's higher on the priority list than bowl prep.
Yeah.
With all that these guys have
Freeze,
yeah. I mean, he basically admitted, nope, teacher, I did not prepare for this test and study the way that I should have. And this is why I got an F. This is why this played out the way that it did. But you see these teams look totally unprepared. Auburn looked like that. Florida State looked like that. and they just have so many other things that they have to manage. So I just look, I don't think that there is an obvious fix. You could say these things in theory, but in actuality, there's just so much that's out there, so many moving pieces that got us to this stage, and FSU just being kind of over it, just being over it, being over the playoff, being over the system that kept them out. So I realize that's a lot to kind of piece in. This was going to be a matchup that Georgia was going to win, even if FSU was at full strength, in my opinion. It would have been a much better game. It wouldn't have been a 60-point game, the biggest blowout in bowl history. But I just don't think it's as easy as saying, oh, well, just do this to the portal, or you can't have guys enter the portal in December. Like, no, they have to be able to enter in December if you've got coaches that are looking to fill rosters, and if coaches can move, then players should be allowed to as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that there's always been a lot of this movement, right? Because at the end of the day, your offensive coordinator, your defensive coordinator, head coach. I mean, look what happened to LSU against Purdue last year. Like, that had nothing to do with the transfer portal. It was just that coaching staff picked up and left. I think that's always going to be the case. I think in previous years as well, you got to factor in maybe guys couldn't take lateral transfers, but a lot of times you would probably just see guys buried on the depth chart and be like, hey, look, suit up. We're not going to play you in this game. If you want to go transfer to the FCS or transfer to a group of 5, go for it.
We've seen that.
Like represent yourself in a way. You're talking, 10 years ago or whatever. And you'd find out these guys are transferring, but they'd be in the videos just to kind of keep it all like handshake, like we're all on the same page here. That obviously has disappeared. But yeah, I do think this is all about, for FSU, one thing that we've hit on a lot is this sport has not been about winning a championship, right? But for FSU, it was. And they got robbed of that opportunity. I think they did enough to do that. So once you get told over and over again, well, we're going to stress that the championship is all that matters, and then you go undefeated, you beat 2 SEC teams, you beat Clemson, you do all that, and then you don't get a chance to play for a championship, I get it. Because it's like, hey, this is not we are trying to win our conference and win the Sugar Bowl. This is, you've told us over and over again all that matters is this playoff, and now you're not going to let us in, so screw you, basically. And I get it, because at the end of the day, you can't give me all these incentives to do this thing, and then I do this thing, and then you like rug pull me, or Charlie Brown with the football. That's what happened to him. So I think this is a little bit special of a case for that, because it's like, if this is, number one, should never have happened, it shouldn't happen ever. Number two, will never happen again, because if a team's 13-0, they're cheating if they're not in the playoff next year. Like, they're under allocations. They got, or even if you're like, Western Michigan, you're 13-0, Liberty would have been in the playoff, like we talked about, and they were not, undefeated. So point being, like, it'll just never happen again. So I do see this as kind of a one-off, and that's why a lot of this stuff is kind of bad faith, because it's like, yeah, I think that we'll never get a team like this again that we never had before, honestly.
Yeah, and Nicole Auerbach wrote a really good column about this in The Athletic about fixes, and essentially kind of piggybacking on the thing that Kirby brought up. And one of the things that would be interesting, especially as we transition into the 12-team playoff, is if we didn't have these automatic slots for bowl games, and if there was a little bit more of a selection process for like, hey, keep this bowl obviously has this hierarchy, and then you could pick this team. But like with New Year's Six, it's just slotted. Like it's just there, and it's not like these administrators have a say and they get to kind of jockey over. Like, how far down the baton would FSU have been passed? Like, how many bowls would have passed up on FSU? Obviously, you didn't know all the opt-outs. You didn't know all the portal guys at that time, and you got to be able to figure this out. So it's a really fluid process, and it's easier to just have those things in place. But if you could have avoided that to prevent us from seeing FSU on this stage with a team that obviously was not ready to be on that stage, it was not the FSU that we saw. This was different than Florida getting waxed by Oklahoma at the end of the 2020 season. This was far less of a team even than that, with 31 guys that were not available in this game. But seeing that as a potential fix. What's going to be also interesting to see that Nicole brought up in this column was the need to be creative in these non-playoff bowl games will never be more important than it is when we feel like it all comes down to the 12-team playoff. And if
we're talking to you, Pop-Tart mascot.
We are. It was a thing of beauty. Pop-Tarts, Mayo Bowl, Cheez-It Bowl has been on top of it.
The Cheez-It Bowl with the sign that says "not an edible mascot." One of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Unreal. The Idaho, the Potato Bowl, like, which, by the way, the photo that always goes viral every single year with like the initial French fries that Ohio's pouring. The guy that's actually doing the pouring was somebody who was like the athlete of the year back when I was in Central Nebraska at like Kearney High. This is just crazy.
Who poured the French fries. Of course, he's from Kearney High. I love this.
Brian Arp. Shout out Brian Arp. He's a good dude. But yeah, like there are ways in which you have to be more marketable. You have to be creative. You have to be willing to have fun. And instead of going at this of like, oh, well, we're a bowl game and we need to just get our sponsor out here. And like, instead of just having that, sponsors need to be more than just a commercial with a company that the casual fan still doesn't know what they do by day's end. That stuff will matter. That stuff actually matters, and it makes it more fun. It adds to the experience. We need to change our perspective of what those non-playoff bowl games are going to be. And the good news for Kirby is that it's going to be a while probably before he's stepping up to a non-playoff podium. That's just a hunch that I have. By the way, Kirby's 7-0 in bowl games since the Texas mess. So let's move on from that lazy narrative as well. Don't question the motivation.
Too, so
Kirby's had some tough looks after he looked really similar to his playing days for a long time. And there have been some images of Kirby last few months that have just made me think, man, the fountain of youth, it's not there for him in the way that it was. I don't want to say he's aging like a president. But man, like Kirby's had some tough looks come out. I'm not sure that he's going to dip into the hair dye, especially not after one as easy as this. But look, I think Kirby he's seen better days in terms of his youthful glow about him. It turns out signing #1 recruiting classes and competing for national championships, it takes a toll on the best of us.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you win recruiting and you blow out your bowl game is you just don't sleep. But I will say this. I was talking about the Texas win aging gracefully. I was joking about Texas being back and now being respectful. So, hey, losing to Texas now, not so embarrassing. You just got to sit on it for a minute.
Will, is Texas back or are they not back? Because they did not meet our back standard that we set out in the preseason. We said Texas has to make it to a national championship to be considered back, getting to the college football playoff.
You stood on business, and you were right. You were like, you know what? I'm not going to call them back yet. I was like, they beat Alabama. They were in the playoff. They won the Big 12. It's in for me. No, they're getting embarrassed by the Huskies.
I mean, embarrassed. They didn't get blown out or anything. They lost a football game. They lost to a football team that could stretch them out in ways that other teams couldn't, in ways that even Alabama couldn't. But Texas not officially being back as of this recording on Saturday Night South podcast. Heard it here first. One last thing with Georgia. I do think this team could have won a national championship as I laid out. In a 12-team playoff, they could have absolutely gone all the way. I do think this is one of the best 4 teams in the country, but that doesn't matter. Georgia would not have been the 3rd-ranked one-loss team in any other year besides this one, where they lost to another one-loss team and the team who beat that one-loss team. It was the perfect storm. It's not a conspiracy theory. They had national championship potential. I admitted to being wrong about Bobo as the thing holding them back from that. I do think that Georgia just got unlucky, lost the only game on the schedule that it couldn't afford to lose. If Georgia had lost to South Carolina instead of Alabama, Georgia is playing for a national championship. That I very much believe, but still impressive that Georgia's senior class went 50-4 and closed it out the way that they did. Yeah. Insane.
Yeah.
Insane.
Wait, hold on. Does that mean that, I know we're going back a little bit, but this is worth noting. This means that the Bama class, they broke the streak of classes being promised a championship, right?
Yes. Good point. I meant to bring that up. Yes. No longer can Nick Saban walk into a living room and say, if you are here for 3 years, you will win a national championship. So negative recruiting galore for all those other coaches. You're like, hey, Saban's still saying that to you? He's actually a blatant liar if you look at recent history. So maybe get away from that take a little bit. Just what everybody's needed. Negative recruiting against Saban.
There you go. Right. Yeah. Hey, look, before I be positive about Georgia, let me just throw in some Saban slander to treat no. But to be honest, like, I think that you're right about the culture thing. I think at the end of the day, Kirby understands PR better than almost anyone. I mean, and he's not really gotten to the point where he just kind of complains about things the way that Saban does, but he will kind of throw a jab, talk about recruiting with Mullen. He'll do all that. He hasn't quite gotten to the point where he has the cachet to be able to just change things. But I will say that he understands, okay, if you beat the snot out of this very vulnerable Florida State team, it increases your momentum for recruiting and increases your national footprint. And that, again, was what was so beautiful about college football for so long, is that you could beat Alabama and beat Georgia and end your season on a loss where everyone's dissecting your final play and everything. And if you're Georgia, you smashed FSU, and all you got to say is, we would have played better against Michigan. And honestly, it's hard to disagree with how well they played in every game but Alabama, pretty much. And so, point being, I think you're right. I think that they were probably – it's funny, right? Because we could say that getting in Bama for a great game. Well, it did create a great game. But then you can also turn around and look at Georgia and say, yeah, I mean, this result notwithstanding, because I'm not going to overreact, like I said, but they were so just clearly the number one team for most of the year, for all of the year until the very end, basically. And then they, Ohio State jumped up, I get it or whatever, but the number two, I'll never forget that. But point being, they could still say, this was a top 4 team in America and not be BSing, because most of the year they very much were. And so I think it's cool. I think it's a very nice season for Kirby. I think that we're kind of told everything is linear, where it's like, okay, it was either good or a bad season. It was a great season for Georgia. I think this is a season that Georgia fans would have taken any year. I think it's kind of sad to not do a three-peat, but think about what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Think about that sentence.
Yeah.
Disappointed for no three-peat.
Yeah, bummer that you didn't do something that hadn't been done in 87 years. That was always going to be the standard for this Georgia team, but obviously it doesn't mean that this year was a total failure by any stretch. And who knows, maybe 3-4 is going to happen for a team that I'd be surprised if they started outside of the top 2 or top 3, depending on how the national championship plays out. But I think that is set up. Both of those teams, by the way, Washington and Michigan, I don't think will start off as top 2 or top 3 teams, unless, of course, we all of a sudden get a wrath of returnees from Michigan or something like that, and they hold this thing together in a way that we don't foresee. Cotton Bowl, Will. Mizzou and Ohio State was, oh man, it was not pretty for a whole lot of it. But hey, doesn't matter. Mizzou wins this game. Mizzou wins 11 games and beats Ohio State in the first time that Mizzou has ever appeared in a New Year's Six or BCS Bowl. And again, the Cotton Bowl just wasn't part of that during the BCS era, so it's a little bit murky. It's not to say it's the best season in Mizzou history, but it is certainly up there. Cheers to that. Mizzou fans probably thought that they were about to get screwed in this game. The non-review of the Devin Brown fumble, which, as I'm saying this, I can't believe that was only Friday night, and we're sitting here recording on Tuesday. That feels like that was 3 weeks ago already. Yep. The amount of football we've seen since then. But that was wild. Of all the plays not to review, a quarterback maybe fumbling inside his own 7 with a clear recovery was pretty bizarre. Don't know what in the world was going on there. But yeah, it was basically over when Ohio State had to move on to a true freshman against this Mizzou defense. Johnny Walker Jr. was great. Chris Abrams-Drain is just so good. And I'm glad that guy continues to get NFL love. It feels like we kind of overlooked the player that he was in college, but he won't be one of those guys that has, I think, a really good NFL career that we look back on. We're like, oh yeah, he was a big part of Mizzou's defense turning things around. But a Mizzou team that just had no opt-outs kept playing. Didn't matter that they didn't score until the fourth quarter. In some ways, kind of a microcosm for the Eli Drinkowitz era. This year 4, quarter 4, boom, explosion, 14 points, 11 wins. Yeah, we can call 14 points.
The 10th year of Brady Cook.
Yeah, you just got to give him time. He looked hurt, by the way, for a bit. But I thought him actually getting more banged up on that run going out of bounds was the thing that kind of turned around his day. And Mizzou had looked totally ineffective to that point and then played much better football down the stretch. Not sure how Cody Schrader wasn't MVP of this game. They gave it to, as they announced, Brady Cooks with an S.
Who?
Brady Cooks. Yeah. Interesting. Haven't heard that one this year. Brady Cooks. Brady does like to cook, so maybe it was just more of a sentence.
Cook. Yeah.
Brady Cooks. And I don't know what follows that, but ultimately he was given that honor. But yeah, just how can you not love Cody Schrader? He's so fun to watch. I think he finished as the nation's leading rusher. TBD, I guess, with the national championship, but I think he's going to finish as the nation's leading rusher. He was the difference in that one. He just keeps his head down. He doesn't get frustrated when things aren't going his way early, keeps going to work. Same with Luther Burden III, by the way.
Yeah.
He did not take himself out of that game, even though he didn't get a target until late in the first half. And I thought that was key. And he ends up having the dagger touchdown in this one. He hit the silencer, the Ohio State celebration. If you're a LeBron hater, you love seeing that. I take joy in that because people forget LeBron would have gone to Ohio State and he definitely wouldn't have gone to Duke and that millions of dollars that he would have been given. But I do love seeing an anti-LeBron celebration as a pro MJ guy.
Just like he woke up and he saw Kobe's 81-point game coming. He must have seen that coming, and so he switched away from Ohio State. Yep. But anyway, yeah, I think that, as I'm watching this game, and we talked about this in the preview, it's like if you are Ohio State, you are watching the absolute perfect storm nightmare unfold against Mizzou, which is, I mean, look at the three kind of like offensive leaders in this team, right? You have a boy, Brady Cooks, who's been there obviously forever. He's kind of been the resurgence of Mizzou. Obviously not long enough to get his name remembered, but he's been there. And so
we need to just start calling him Brady Cooks every single time. Just nobody's going to get it unless they... Yeah, nobody's going to get it unless they listen to this exact part. But yes, henceforth, he should be known as just Brady Cooks.
Yep, easy. So he has him. There's Schrader, who we talked about, came from Truman, not Truman State, just Truman. It's like,
I thought it was Truman State. I think it was Truman State, wasn't it? Yeah.
I looked it up, but they just gave me Truman. I don't even know. It's like wherever that was. Maybe it is the Truman Show. Maybe it's on a different planet. I don't know. We can't get enough info about them. But he came out of nowhere. We talked about how it was kind of like a drink, like, here, fine, dang, like, we'll get your guy a chance, and he has been awesome. And like, so you look at Brady Cooks, who's been there forever. You look at Schrader, who has, like, this is his Meek Mill, like, I used to pray for times like this, like playing Ohio State and balling out the way he did. Dude's covered in tattoos, looks like he like drives an old RAV4. Like, he's just like dude, he's just like the dude you would see in college. You'd be like, damn, that guy rules. And like, so point being, like, he's out there running angry because he's not opting out. There's no opt out in his game. He's just a dog. That's how he's gotten here. Then you look over at Luther Burden, you're like, this guy, I mean, take out Marvin Harrison, probably the best receiver Ohio State has. He's a legit 5-star guy, like a guy that Ohio State wanted really bad and ended up at Mizzou. Look at those three guys. You're like, uh-oh, these are not going to be easy guys to stop, because at the end, like you said, Burden, like Schrader had one, Burden had the second one, and it was nasty. And it was like, oh, yeah, actually, they are starting to turn around NIL. They are starting to get guys like Luther Burden. It's not just like these old, like, fundamental players. It's like, no, you have some dudes that are legitimate 1A, like, top priorities for other schools like Ohio State that they're keeping in state. And I think it was just such a great moment for Mizzou football. And like you said, Drink taking a minute, it kind of being down to the wire, but ultimately the changes he made and the changes he didn't, sticking with Brady, sticking with Schrader, giving him a chance, and not being, scared, or not scared is a bad word, not falling the pressure. And as much as like his stubbornness or being himself has gotten him in trouble with the goofy celebrations and stuff, I think it's cool to see a guy trust his guns, trust his guys, and come out against an Ohio State team that just felt over it and like they didn't care. And it's like, dude, you just got smoked by Mizzou, dude. Like, it just, I'm gonna remember that forever. I don't care what you say to me.
By the way, we do have confirmation. It is indeed Truman State, as you can see. Right
okay.
Yeah,
the website.
So, yeah, we got the Cody Schrader bio pulled up from Truman State.
There you go.
Look, the question that I kept asking during this game, and I know this is going to go against what Joel Klatt tweeted out about how bowl games only matter when an SEC team wins, and I just don't even have the time to dissect how wrong that take was, and how far off Joel is by just saying that and ignoring the Big Ten side.
When they lose, you start tweeting, dog.
Exactly. That's the irony. Was Mizzou better than Ohio State at full strength? It's I think, look, I think Mizzou was better at full strength, and this wasn't a full strength Ohio State offense, obviously, without Maserati Marv. That was a really bad Gus Johnson imitation. Just bleep that out. And not having Kyle McCord, who I think a lot of people looked at, with a different lens, pre-Cotton Bowl as opposed to post-Cotton Bowl. Maybe a little bit more appreciation for Kyle McCord. But I do think that Mizzou would have still given the Ohio State offense a lot of problems. I think that the defense got better, and even though they were a bit banged up down the stretch, I still think they did enough things to be able to win games for you. But here's the crazy thing. The crazy takeaway that is undeniable, even for the most loyal Ohio State apologist. I think it's Mr. Ohio on Twitter, as he goes by, who tweets a lot of really positive things about the SEC and is very unbiased in his approach, I think, about everything. We're living in a world in which Mizzou has fewer questions than Ohio State. Think about that. That's undeniable. You could talk about what Mizzou returns in the offseason, the questions at quarterback, the questions about Ryan Day, the massive hurdles that are standing in the way of Ohio State right now. And there are very few times in which we have looked at Ohio State, really since Jim Tressel left, where we have wondered, what's next? Is this team really going to be able to sustain this? Are they going to be able to go toe-to-toe with Oregon, a team that came into their place 2 years ago with a certain Joe Moorhead-led offense and beat the brakes off of them? Are they going to be able to hang with this Washington team, what they've become with Kalen DeBoer? whereas Mizzou played with every team on that SEC schedule. They did. And you can't deny that this team has a lot of momentum going forward. And momentum season to season, I guess, is very arbitrary. And there are certain ways that are unfair to look at it and other ways where it makes a little bit more sense. But it's amazing to think that Mizzou became this team. They just allowed the fewest points against an AP top 10 team in 42 years at Mizzou. That's crazy. Like Mizzou as a top 5 team in the SEC to start next year seems very fair. Like you're going to have Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss ahead in the power rankings. We're going to get to Ole Miss in a second year. I promise, Ole Miss fans. But then after that, it's kind of, if you're doing SEC power rankings in the preseason, I'm not talking about win total where you're projecting schedules and you're looking at things on the road. But if you're just talking SEC power rankings, Mizzou, LSU, and Oklahoma are probably all in there for that 5th spot, right? Do you push back on that?
Yeah. No, I don't push back. I think that's accurate. I think that exactly kind of what we've been talking about, which is it doesn't feel really like a flash in the pan. It feels like a bunch of guys that have been together for a while, that have a good culture, that kind of just all figured it out, and they can build on that, as strange as that sounds for Mizzou.
I think that's all very realistic for this team. Mizzou should feel good about the year that it had and the year that it could have next season as well. Obviously, they're going to have to do some things in the portal, I think, to address some needs that they could have on the defensive side of the ball, and continue to add offensive weapons is something that Eli Drinkwitz is going to do. But great year, just a great year for Mizzou, and a win that felt very impactful. I don't think it necessarily changes the entire trajectory of the program, just that simple result. But do I think it puts a nice exclamation point on a really solid season, and a season that they've been waiting a decade for, 9 years for? Yes, absolutely.
I'll piggyback on that too. It's like, I don't necessarily think it's program changing, but as we just talked about, like there's only a certain amount of teams that legitimately think they can compete in their heart of hearts. And if you're Drink right now, if you're those players right now, you can look guys in the eye and say, we beat Ohio State. And it was a domination. It was, you know what I'm saying, they scored 3 points. Like and you talk about whatever, but I'm never going to feel bad about Ohio State's talent. I'm never going to feel bad about, oh, you guys only had 1 4-star quarterback playing in this one. Like, no, dude, get out of here. Like, so point being, like, I think that when you show that you can hang with even, you know, a team not at full strength like that, it's like, it shows that you believe in yourself, you believe in your program. And Mizzou is a team that historically has had a little bit of that, you know, a little bit of that bad luck, a little bit of that, oh shucks, like anything can go wrong. And when you play a team down to the wire where any play could have been a disaster, if you get down 10-0 in that game at any point, that would have also felt a little bit insurmountable with how their offense was moving. So it's like they lived on the edge of the blade or the edge of the razor the entire game. They never puked in their shoes. They never coughed it up. I think that's really, really, really hard to do. And so, like I said, if you're drinking, you look yourself in the mirror, you can look at recruits and say, we can do this here. Come to Mizzou.
Got that extension as well. Got that extension. You knew it was coming. The extension is it's there. It is locked in. Good for Drink. Good for Mizzou. All right, Peach Bowl. I got a lot of things wrong on this show in the preview pod, including my pick for the national championship. Got both of those games wrong. Have said things during bowl season that just did not go the way that I expected. But I told everyone for about a month and a half that Ole Miss was a better team than Penn State. And if Penn State was going to be the team that leaves Ole Miss out of a New Year's Six Bowl, I would have felt very uneasy about that. And Buddy nailed that one. That one. And yes, I know the opt-outs, Penn State, that hurt. No Chop Robinson, obviously not having their stud corners. Abdul Carter, him getting banged up in this game was kind of the last straw for the defense. Didn't have Manny Diaz running the show. I'm not pretending that this is Penn State at 100% strength. But Ole Miss was and is the better football team. Just is. Okay?
Yep.
It was the case all year. It was the case on that stage. When Lane is giving J.J. Pegues direct snaps,
it's a great day for everyone, because that means James Franks is losing. So it's really just a great day for Earth.
That's exactly what that means, Will. It is exactly what that means. Maybe it was also over when officials noticed that Penn State was consistently jumping off sides and actually decided to call it correctly instead of just calling it on the one time in which Ole Miss should have had a free play and they scored a touchdown on that play. But it was definitely over when on 4th and 1 in a 23-17 game, his offense averaging 6 yards per carry. James Franklin is like, I know it's only 4th and 1, but I'm on my own 34. And I'm going to punt this ball away. Bad luck. Ole Miss goes right down the field, 31-17. that was all she wrote from there. Just did not matter to James Franklin whatsoever that Ole Miss defensive line was actually getting gashed pretty good by the ground game. It really was. Like I thought Penn State early on I was like, Ole Miss, they're going to let them run for 300 in this game, and they probably could have, but yeah, you can see watching that why Lane and Pete Golding have been able to sell the likes of Princely Umanmielen from Florida, Walter Nolan, Tyler Barron, Chris Paul Jr., these guys that are going to be playing in the box for this team, rushing off the edge. They have spots available. They do. And I say that as a JJ McGee's lover, as a Jared Ivey supporter, both of whom will be back. But yeah, just instead of recognizing that strength that Penn State obviously had and how pivotal of a spot that was in the game to try and get some of that momentum back, Ole Miss just took all the momentum that James Franklin served up on a platter for him. And yeah, they were never going to come back from that. So yeah, it was a really tough look, I think, when Penn State argued all year that it was this dominant defensive team that could play with anyone. This was the best defense that they've had since, maybe since the late 90s. Like it was up there. Maybe some of those teams mid 2000s had a defense that was just as good as this. But like even a Micah Parsons Penn State defense didn't have the dudes all around that this group had. And obviously not all of them were out there. So maybe it's a little bit unfair, but still.
For some Paul Postlosny.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a really good one. What number was he?
That I don't know. Yeah.
That I don't know off the top of my head. He was a neck roll guy, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. Throughout.
Yeah. Big time, of course. But yeah, Ole Miss having 340 yards of offense at halftime against the Penn State defense that allowed 223 yards per game. Tough look for Penn State. Tough look. 540 total for Ole Miss by day's end. Lane and Charlie Weiss Jr. just called an excellent game in this one. And yeah, Ole Miss took it to him. I mean, it's as simple as that. Ole Miss was and is the better football team.
Yeah, I think almost no notes there. I think, especially and almost underrating, an Ole Miss coach offensive staff that is, losing Levy. They just rebuilt. They didn't, miss a beat. I think that's super cool. And at the end of the day, first 11-win season in program history. So it's always something to play for. I think that we talked about the vibes, and those matter so much more in bowl games where it's Lane Kiffin and all of his guys. Like, I'm not going to say it feels like the end of something because it actually feels like the beginning. It feels like a little bit of like an arrival. You know what I'm saying? And I texted you that I've never liked Lane Kiffin more than this moment. Just molly-whopping Penn State, having all the fun in the world, representing the SEC well. Like, it feels like we are can't believe I'm saying this again. Feels like we are kind of finally watching Lane Kiffin grow up. And like, while week of the bowl game, we are busting Lane Kiffin for making fake burners. I understand all of that, right?
Allegedly.
That's funny.
Allegedly.
And yeah, it's one of those, is he aware of the situation? Who knows? Who cares? I think that's hilarious. And I think at the end of the day, if you can do all the dumb stuff and still win football games, you're the best. I mean, that's the highlight of American entertainment right there. If you can have the fun, kind of still be yourself, show that personality. Like, we've been shown that winning looks a certain way, and it has to be not fun. It has to be joyless, as the Bama fans call it. I was joyless last night. But Lane Kiffin is so much fun when he's winning, and it makes him, as much as he can be, a little bit of a what would I call it? A little prima donna, I guess would be the PC way to say that. It is very fun to root for him, especially against a team like Penn State, which you hit on it, man. Never going for a fourth down, never trusting their quarterback, tight, angry, blaming other people. It just felt like that whole sideline was like just tense and trying to leave it's like when you kind of get a little bit older and you go to a party and you're like, I don't want to be here, but I got to do the Jim Halpert, do something memorable, get out of there. It's like they were doing that at the bowl game. They were like, look, we don't want to be here. I got to get back to my kid at home. I just want to say hello. And Lane was just like doing a keg stand. Like, I'm just getting ready, boys. Come on. This is my house. And like, that was the bowl matchup. It was James Franklin just shamefully pinching, just not having a fun time at all, going for these fourth downs or not going for these fourth downs. And yeah, I think there's something to be said about that Lane is creating a place that's atypical. It's for weirdos like him. And I think there's a place for that in college football. I think it's cool.
James Franklin, Ryan Day, handshake emoji, not trusting their quarterbacks to throw downfield.
Yep.
That's it right there. You see, like, say what you want about Florida State in that game. I thought Mike Norvell actually gave his guy a chance and gave his guy an opportunity to be able to work through some of those mistakes instead of just constantly like, okay, we can't throw the ball downfield whatsoever. And Penn State's best play of the day was that like broken play where Aller just had to kind of scramble, and it was like a tip pass. I think that went to the tight end or whatever it was. But just so few of those opportunities where you're like, dude, you got single coverage on the outside. Just let him throw it up and try and make a play, try and get a DPI, something. And that just wasn't there. Like,
let your guy make a chance. No, you're speaking Japanese. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're losing again to Michigan and Ohio State and in your bowl game. You played all these teams and you wasted this defense because you don't want to let your guy, you don't trust your players, your great players that you brought, these 4 or 5 star guys. You look at Penn State in the talent composite every year, they're in the top 10, but you talk to James Franklin, it's like they're the little sisters of the poor. It's like, bro, you have great athletes. Trust them. Yeah. Don't limit them. These are college kids. It's a bowl game. We just ate a mascot alive. Have fun. It's okay.
We just ate a mascot alive.
None of this matters unless you do what you did, actually.
Yeah. 2 years of the post-Levy era for Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. I think that we can say at this point, if you were saying that was the common denominator, or if you were just saying like, oh, he was just benefiting from Levy's play calling, I think we've moved on from that with the year that Ole Miss has had. Caden Prieskorn, I got to highlight this guy real quick because I'm not sure I've talked about him enough this year. I've tried to bring him up at certain points, but it's tough because he's a tight end who in rare fashion has been more beneficial in the ground game than the passing game. And I think the Memphis transfer, as you saw in that game, is just such a big part of what they're trying to do. You see him have a day like that in the passing game, and you're reminded why Michael Trigg hit the portal midseason, even though he was the Tulane game hero. This is a guy who I think in a post-Brock Bowers world should be the preseason first-team All-SEC tight end next year. I really do. I think he is worthy of that. He was second in receiving yards among SEC tight ends behind Ole Bowers anyways. But a huge part of what they were able to do in this game, very successful. Penn State just had no answers for him whatsoever. And they couldn't stop Jackson Dart. They couldn't stop him. And I know that Jackson Dart missed the dunk. That was probably the only knock on him all day. If that dunk goes down, man, we're talking about one of the great bowl performances of the year. But I need to put some respect on him for a second because I didn't think it was fair to assume that he was going to become 2020 Matt Corral, year 2 in the Lane Kiffin offense. I'd still favor Corral in the season that he had, especially pre-injury, the player that he was over the 2023 version of Dart. But he got a lot closer to that than I thought he would. The command of the offense, the swag, the toughness, it is very Corral-esque. And I think that you see a guy that has figured some things out down the stretch. He had more passing yards against the Penn State defense, 379, than any quarterback since Brady White in the Cotton Bowl at the end of the 2019 season. That's pretty crazy to think about. He was very, very good. He cut the interceptions in half this season. He was much better at being able to find those running lanes in the red zone, an area that we really criticized with him last year. Remember last year when he didn't get a rushing touchdown until the bowl game? It was just like, how does Jackson Dart not find the end zone? How has he not figured that out when he is a really good runner as a quarterback? He had 8 rushing scores this year, and the one that he had in the middle of the fourth quarter was kind of the dagger. He was blowing the kisses afterwards. Not a swan song either. He announced that he is coming back, and that is a huge, huge bit of news for Ole Miss to be able to get coming off of that game, even more of the positive vibes. I think if you're ranking SEC quarterbacks coming back next year, he's 3 or 4. He's 3 or 4 probably, because I think I would still take Milroe and Beck. And obviously we're going to wait on the Quinn Ewers decision, which as of this recording, we don't have any information on that yet. I'd probably give Quinn Ewers like a slight nod, but I could be talked into Jackson Dart. I probably could. Like if you told me as a preseason take that I think Jackson Dart will have the best season of any quarterback in 2024, I think I'm good with that because of his surroundings, with getting Judkins back, with Trey Harris, with Prieskorn. You add Juice Wells, an all SEC receiver, to that lineup. Like that group is loaded. Those guys are all potential preseason first team all SEC players. Judkins, Harris, Prieskorn, Juice Wells. Like that is so much talent that Ole Miss is going to have to work with. And that is why this is going to be Lane's best team coming into a season since he started off number 1 at USC in 2012. I mean, that's a wild thought. Coming off of this year where you lead Ole Miss to the most wins it's ever had in a season in program history. He has a win now team in every way. The schedule lines up. We talked about that a few weeks ago with no Bama. You get Oklahoma instead of Texas at home. So here's the question. How much love is too much love for Ole Miss? because Reese Davis said before the Peach Bowl, if Ole Miss wins this game, preseason top 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think I agree with him, Will. I think it's too trendy to say that Ole Miss will win a national title. I think it's too trendy to say that, just because we still have the Georgia game that still stands out a lot. You still got the Saban hurdle that Lane has to be able to overcome. It's still a 3-21 mark against Power 5 teams who won at least non-regular season games. 2 of those wins came this year, obviously, with one of these being Penn State. But Lane is working with a different type of level of proven talent, right? Like, that is the difference, I think, with this team. I think Ole Miss will start behind Alabama, Georgia, and Texas. But outside of that, I can't give you anyone that's a true no-doubter. And maybe the SEC is going to start off with the top 4 teams in the country. Like, that's a crazy thing, but not that crazy when you actually sit here and break down what some of these other contenders are losing at the top. Ole Miss's last top 5 start in the AP poll was the Richard Nixon administration.
Jeez, man. Yeah.
So
yeah,
could be adding towards top 5 start.
Yeah, I mean, it's facts. Anyway, so yeah, I think it's gonna be a super interesting 2020. Like, I'm already excited about 2024. Not because Bama lost, because that I mean, who cares? But like, when it comes to what we're looking at this next year, like, I started to kind of dread the future when it was announced, and now as each day kind of moves faster, I realize it's like, yeah, the SEC is so set up well. Like, shocking that all these great, highly paid administrators kind of like got their ducks in a row, kind of as the door closed. And you go look at Mizzou, you look at Ole Miss, same situations where it's like, you guys are historically about here. Now we see you're about here. Can you get to a third level, right? And I think that for Ole Miss, I mean, weird as it sounds, I think Mizzou has been closer in big games. I think that when it comes to, like, you know, Georgia and Alabama and stuff like that, and like, LSU's not one of those teams. All right, let's be honest about it. LSU's not one of those teams. They're not your 5-star like class of college football. So I think that they've, like, and the question for Lane was always, what was your biggest win? I think this year the LSU win was really big. I think the Penn State win, again, you can kind of look at that though and say, well, you know, they're missing these guys, So I still think they need, that's my last level of like, I'll totally be over the hump. If they can go in and beat a Georgia, they won't play Alabama, like you said, but you know, when they play the best teams and you need to have your best game, because we still saw kind of a different team in those games. We saw a team that got smaller against not a good Alabama team. An Alabama team that at that point in the season was struggling with USF and didn't know their quarterback situation. Like, Ole Miss had that win to take and could have been, honestly, in the playoff, looking at what we know now, like looking at how good they've gotten from them. So they took themselves out of the conversation so early that it's hard to say how they would play with expectations, because Kirby's talked about it, you know, Saban's talked about it, Coach O really struggled with it. It's so different to be the hunted than the hunter. I think Lane's personality speaks really well as the hunter. And I'll say this really quick about Jackson Dart. I will credit Lane Kiffin in this way. We talked about this, and I love that Lagway question you gave me a couple weeks ago about similar quarterback situations. That made me start to think how many of these situations we get to look at in hindsight. Bringing in Spencer Sanders is a great example of one of those, where it's like, well, if things went, you know, the way we thought, he could have taken over. He was his veteran quarterback, but bringing in that extra guy and knowing that competition is real, and it's not, okay, well, if you know, screw up, you're Jalen Milroe and your backup is Buckner, so you're out there, brother. It's like, no, we brought in a guy who is literally biting at your heels. Is it going to toughen you up? Is it going to grow you up? Or are you going to run from those expectations? And I think that Jackson Dart, like you said, has gotten better. I think that if you're a quarterback, especially a portal quarterback, you're looking at Lane Kiffin going, well, this is a couple of guys in a row that Lane Kiffin has kind of rehabbed their careers, put them in a position to succeed, given them control of the offense, given them the ability to be decision makers. And I think as Jackson Dart, like you said, has improved in that area, you know, Lane Kiffin has a big boy offense. He has an offense that if your quarterback is dealing the way that Corral used to and that Dart has turned into, you can do a lot of big things and you can hit these big plays and you look awesome. So yeah, I think that's credit to him on how he's managed. It's kind of unfair to Sanders, but I think Sanders had the opportunity and I think Dart just outplayed him. And so I think it was a true competition. I think Lane played it perfectly.
Lane has pushed a lot of buttons correctly, that being one of them. The Grove Collective and trying to really ramp up those efforts has paid dividends already in the portal, and is something that we'll probably talk about ad nauseum this offseason and the impact of those guys. But there is a whole lot to feel good about if you are an Ole Miss fan heading into 2024. All right, well, let's talk about your team. Let's talk about the ReliQuest Bowl.
The real best returning quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier.
Of course. I was already going through of where do I think Nussmeier will rank when I do preseason quarterback rankings. And I was like, no, it's premature. Let's wait for some things to think. it's one game. We got to get into what it's going to look like with the portal and a lot of these other guys. Don't want to be too reactionary, but here's what we do know: Brian Kelly winning 10 games, money in the bank, never a doubt. 7 consecutive seasons with at least 10 wins for BK. The only coach in college football with a longer streak of 10 wins. Nick Saban was 16. They showed Dabo as being part of that as well, but like thinking to myself, wait a minute.
Huh?
Dabo got win number 9 against Kentucky. Unless Clemson is playing in another bowl game that they organized to get to a 10th win, last I checked, they're not going to be able to get there. So yes, that is just Brian Kelly at number 2 on that list.
Well,
but
listen,
yeah,
you play against yourself every day if you're Dabo Sweaty, and you're 1-0 every day, brother. So that's 10 wins.
I don't see anything wrong with what you just said. I don't think Dabo would either. Count that. Add it to the total. Keep the streak going. Well, instead of talking about how bad the LSU defense was and how they basically allowed Wisconsin to salivate whenever they got man coverage on the outside, wild thing to process for a school that we have debated whether or not it's DBU and Wisconsin receivers. We don't need
another best passing day ever.
Tanner Mordecai played his tail off, man. Oh man, he's like, wait, the LSU defense. This is I thought they had guys. No. Little did you know, they did not. They did not.
They have some older gentlemen who came from Kent State. But yeah, I mean, how many times have we had some new passing yardage scoring record broken against LSU? Like we saw all the way going back to Mississippi State in 2020. I mean, this is a joke.
Part of history.
LSU's defense.
Yeah, just part of history. I mean, that's fine.
That's the thing. I mean, we joked about it from week 2. Never wavered. The best offense in the nation is LSU, and the second best offense is whoever there's playing LSU. And that could be Tanner Mordecai. That could be whoever you want it to be. They had a receiver with like $150 and 2 tutties. Sure, dude. But take a photo, put it on your Avi of you dunking on us, because it's gonna happen again. If we played that game 10 times, they get to 30 every time.
So let me ask the question then. Speaking of Nuss, the Nuss bus, they really tried to get that nickname going during the broadcast. I was not a fan of that.
Yeah,
it's the Gus bus. It's not the Nuss bus. We need to be a little bit more creative. We'll workshop that one. We'll save it. But greatest performance. If you want to give it a number grade 1 to 10, you want to do letter grade, whatever. But how would you grade out Garrett Nussmeier?
Honestly, I'd give them a solid A. I know that Wisconsin's not some crazy team, but they're a team, who is building. They're a team that has that Phil Longo offense, and Garrett Nussmeier was asked to, come from adversity. And, I talked about Denbrock, but at the end of the day, it's about continuity, right? This is not your team. This is Jaden Daniels' team. This is not, the 2 co-OCs. It's not their offense. It's Denbrock's offense. So you walk into a situation where you're already kind of piecemealing things together. And, Wisconsin celebrating this punt, a great punt, got another 2-yard line. Nussmeier goes down there, and after struggling, throwing interceptions, maybe throwing completions, but not getting to the sticks, 98-yard game-winning drive in a bowl game, I think is kind of the stuff of legend. And it makes you feel good about the offense. It makes you feel like the guys in the building are talented and capable. I joked about used to pray for times like this, because it's like, how many 400-yard, not technically 400, it's 395, I think, but how many 400-yard passing days has LSU ever had from a quarterback? And the fact that there's a backup in this situation, LSU's wearing the purple. For some reason, Brian Kelly's wearing white. Wish we could have switched those two.
Yeah, I agree. Weird look.
But we did everything kind of wrong. It was like the defense gave up 2 early scores, and we thought everyone, and you tweeted this, was a fair question. How many games does LSU win without Jaden Daniels? Because this is what they did at the beginning of games. They made games look unwinnable from the snap, and then suddenly they would figure it out. But yeah, ending that game on 3 straight sacks and fumbles was just poetic. Where Wingo played, Malik Neighbors played.
That was baffling, by the way. That Mekhi Wingo played in this football game, and we get into the culture stuff of who's opting out, who's not opting out. I couldn't believe that he was out there. I totally overlooked that in the pregame, and probably should have highlighted that more. I mean, obviously the LSU defense had issues galore, but it's good to see that guy out there after how many key reps that guy has given to this team, and what a different impact he has when he's healthy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, probably the strangest guy playing in a bowl was Mekhi Wingo, because that position is so physical. His injury was so kind of unique, and it's not a high impact position, but he turns it into one. That's the thing. We talked about all last year. maybe the MVP of 2022 LSU was Wingo because of how bad the backups were. The fact that Mason Smith went down the first game of the year, and the difference between the defenses, I think, has a lot to do with Wingo not being that steadying presence in the middle. And so you think about kind of the journey, right, which ends on those 3 massive front 7 plays, Wingo creating pressure. You think about, Neighbors saying it's important to break this record. LSU history matters. Like, it's so funny that Brian Kelly got hired. And of course, even in this game, Notre Dame pages going, "Oh, Brian Kelly, he doesn't care." Da, da, da. But this is the stuff that didn't happen under Les Miles. This is the stuff that didn't happen under even Coach O. 2019, when you're all winning and it's a championship, everybody's bought in. But when you're playing 7-5 Wisconsin in the ReliaQuest Bowl, okay, it's not the same. And we've seen all the excuses that are valid for guys not playing in games like this. But to say we needed every inch of what we got in that game from those leaders, from Jaden Daniels being there on the sidelines, not being somewhere else, from all of this being like on one page. It's what I've always wanted as an LSU fan, to have a guy in charge that gets it and is building something. And as frustrating as the defense has been, it's like at least these guys want to be here and they want to play for this coach, and it's awesome.
Any question about Garrett Nussmeier as QB1, or do you think AJ Swan has a legitimate chance? Like, is this? I would look at this and say this is Nussmeier's job to lose after that bowl game performance. A little bit of shades of like 2019 Mac Jones, what he did in the Citrus Bowl against Michigan. Mm-hmm. I know I talk about that a lot, but I do think there's value in that guy stepping in and looking like the guy, and how much that carries weight into the offseason. Any doubt in your mind whatsoever that Nussmeier is going to be the guy, or is there still a world in which AJ Swan can win the starting job?
Week 1, I think it's Nussmeier. I do think Nussmeier can have some turnovers. We saw that. He can zip the ball in there and trust himself a little bit too much. Yep. I do think the offensive line makes me feel way better. I mean, these guys are hog mollies. These are Brian Kelly prototype guys. And we saw it last year with Florida, where they didn't have time to throw the football. Even a guy like Mertz, who is not really a turnover guy, when he starts to get pressure, can make turnovers. For Nussmeier, he's in a perfect situation for him, which is going to be talented receivers, big receivers, fast receivers, but also really good offensive line. That the mistakes are going to be between his ears. It's not going to be guys hanging off of you trying to make a play. Yeah. So I like his chances.
Okay, you talk about those weapons. Malik Neighbors going on to the NFL. He gets his all-time LSU receiving record. Basically just opted out of the second half once he got that. Yep. Kind of brought that up in the pregame of, like, if he does this, don't be upset, LSU fans. Just be appreciative of the fact that he's going to be out there at all. I'd love to know how many LSU receivers you would put ahead of him on LSU's all-time list, with him setting that career record. So do you want to do a little name game here, like Malik Neighbors or this guy? All right.
Do I want to name LSU receivers from the 2000s? Always.
just pick who you would say. And try and, if you can, just try and talk about college achievements. We're not talking about what they did in the NFL, who's better NFL prospect, just what they meant to LSU, what they did during their time, whose college career you would look back on and say, I'd rather have that guy. Simple enough?
Oh, yeah. Easy.
All right. Malik Neighbors or Josh Reed, the guy whose record he broke?
Oh, man. Josh Reed was special. He was a little bit of the resurgence guy, but I don't think a ton was built off of that. I loved it. Was way back in the day. Offenses were different. I think he was kind of a one-and-done type guy, so I don't think he made that much of an impact. So I personally would take Neighbors.
Malik Neighbors or Dwayne Bowe?
Dwayne Bowe is another guy who had one really, really big season, and I'm not taking that away from him. But I think as a career, I probably am going to go Neighbors.
Isn't it funny that he had the LSU single season receiving touchdowns record, and then 3 different guys on LSU broke it in 2019?
Yep. Yeah, just back to back to back. That team was so unbelievably special. It's crazy, man.
Guys. Yeah. Malik Neighbors or Odell Beckham Jr.?
Oh, that's my boy, man.
That's a tough one,
so
isn't it?
Odell Beckham Jr. is a little bit different in that he also played in the championship game. And I think that offense, I think that he had to make so many individual plays within that offense. Like, you could think about highlight play after highlight play just because the offense was not built for him. He did not play with great quarterbacks. I would probably take Odell Beckham.
Okay. Not Odell. Malik Neighbors or Jarvis Landry?
To me, I think that's Neighbors. I think there's the difference right there. That's a good goal. Yeah.
Okay, and then I probably know where you're going, but we got to ask these last two just in case. Malik Neighbors, Justin Jefferson.
So Jefferson as a college player, I'm actually going to take Neighbors. I think that Jefferson was a number 2 in his team. I think at the end of the day, he was an amazing special receiver. He won the Alabama game on that fair catch, or the not won it, but like he was like that moment I always talk about where like it was the onside kick that was like ended in his hands. I think it was really poetic. I think the beating Oklahoma by himself was awesome. But I would put not to steal your thunder. I would put Chase over him, but not Jefferson because we never saw him as a one.
Okay, fair, fair. So then Chase gets the argument, even though Chase had the one good year, whereas Neighbors had
Mm-hmm.
two.
Well, remember Chase's year also started with the bowl game against UCF, so
True, true,
his
true.
time kind of goes with Joe Burrow because like the whole Joe Burrow getting hit, like people forget that Chase was like right there with him in that game. I think he had like I felt like 200 yards. Maybe that's not, but it was a great receiving game and turned that game around for them. And that could have been the end of something if they lose to UCF in the bowl game. It's like, oh gosh, like what's going on at LSU? So I think that whole resurgence, he was the guy for.
Great career, really, really great career. And as of right now, we don't know Brian Thomas Jr. his future yet,
Yeah.
what he's going to be doing, but was fantastic in this game and looked like the number one, is a number one, deserves to be like. I don't know that there will be. There probably will. Like you go through that list, and you're like, man, it's such a deep and talented list for as frustrating as LSU passing offenses were for most of the 21st century. But like, will there be 10 receivers that we remember as better than Brian Thomas Jr.? I don't know. Maybe not 10 seasons better because he was so freaking special. Like he's leading the country in receiving touchdowns as of right now, pending the national championship. But pretty amazing the player that guy became. All bang the drum team member coming into this year. If that was his last game, what a great fun season he had, and I think lived up to that hype that he came in with when Ed Ogeron was saying like this is the guy, this is the next great LSU receiver. He was so fun.
And I'll say this too: the way those two guys fit together. I mean, we talk like LSU's always had these great duos. So you talked about Juice and Odell, talk about Jefferson and Jamar. These two guys fit together as well as those guys. Like if not, maybe even a little bit better because you look at how Brian Thomas is this huge jump ball receiver. He's still fast. He's the one like who's consistently open on the deep ball, makes the impact catch. Whereas Neighbors is like a bread and butter, meat and potatoes. Like he will throw anything. He will catch anything you throw his way. If it's 3rd and 1, he's got you. Obviously, like I think he had like the most catches on a drop in the SEC to start the year. And there were obviously moments where he struggled, like small moments, but just a huge volume receiver who can get it anywhere. And then the guy who is a deep threat freak, like the way they fit together was so special and fun to watch with Jaden.
Future of the offense, just putting Harold Perkins in the backfield.
Man, that was so funny. Him absorbing that hit and then me realizing he was Harold Perkins was like,
I thought they made a mistake, dude. Well, I was like, that's John Emery out there or something. It was like that's not Harold Perkins. Why did they say that was Harold Perkins carrying that? I was like, oh wait, no, that actually is. They were right. I was wrong. I couldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm. I texted you that a group of Wisconsin fans moved when they were sitting around me just because I wasn't even mean. I was just laughing at LSU. And that was the exact moment I was like, oh my God, that was Harold Perkins that just scored that touchdown. I was like, what are we doing putting Harold Perkins out there? It was so fun. But again, it's a bowl game. Have some fun. Get Pegues involved. Get Harold Perkins. Harold Perkins is now probably the best player, second best player on your team. Like, get him out there. He played running back. You got to keep him engaged too, because I would not be happy if I was him right now.
Give him 5 to 10 carries a game. Who knows? Just go for it. Yeah. All right, Citrus Bowl, the game that was on at pretty much the same time. Let's do this exercise together as a college football collective. I've been on this for a while now. We're going to get even more on this right now because it needs to be known.
I always had enough exercise. They're tired.
There it is, Will. That's why they pay you the big bucks. Nico Iamaleava. Let's all Nico Iamaleava.
Nico Iamaleava.
That's pretty good. You just got to slow yourself down. Don't overthink it. I know in the broadcast they had some issues early. A bit of Iamaleava. They kept wanting to say that. And I was like, it's Leava. It's got it right there in the pronunciation guide. Tennessee tweeted out during the bowl prep leading up to it. He's gone on record now, and I can actually understand what he's saying. Nico Iamaleava. We're going to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do it. I loved how he played in this game. I absolutely loved it. I think that my expectations coming in were, okay, if he scores 2 touchdowns and they win this game, that's kind of the bar against that Iowa defense that actually has a pulse. At least in theory, it has a pulse. 4 touchdowns in his first career start, and 3 of which were obviously with his legs. He looked comfortable. He looked poised. He was in control of this game.
That boy is smooth. Ooh.
There, when you watch him, you get the 5-star, like the 5-star
Mm-hmm.
billing, and he just, for whatever reason, there are spots in which, look, I think he could struggle with in his career, and we'll see kind of what the pocket presence looks like and all those different things. But he looked like he was in total command of the offense. He was the guy that, look, you got a big time exam in college. You show up, you look down, and you're like, I got all the answers. There's
Mm-hmm.
all right here. I studied, I prepared, I'm good to go. I'm gonna walk out of here as like the third person to finish this final. I know I just aced that thing. That was what he was all day. And
He was
to
just like
me,
paying attention in the Josh Heupel meetings while Bazooka Joe was like playing on his phone. He was like, "Wait, hold on, I know this play. I've been rehearsing this one. Hold on, don't throw it deep. Hold on."
to be fair, Bazooka Joe did pour the Cheez-It. We can't say Cheez-It's plural. Remember, he poured the Cheez-It bucket onto Josh Heupel, so he did play a pivotal role in this game. Was part of the prep.
Mm-hmm.
Give him credit for that. I don't think he was a true opt-out. I think this was a mutual benching. So take
Mm-hmm.
that for what it is. Don't hate on the kid. But in my opinion, what we saw from Nico was what Tennessee fans could have hoped for. His sense of calm drifting to his right and delivering these darts that look like they're going to be throwaways and they're instead on target throws is well beyond his years. It really is. It is such a strength of this offense, and I'm not sure we've ever seen a guy in the Heupel system have that skill, because we've seen obviously guys that can make that read, that can scramble with their legs, that can make plays on the move, but in the way that he does that and so effortlessly, you're right. He is smooth, just so unbelievably smooth in some of these spots. I'm not going to hate on Tennessee fans for being excited. Now, if you're saying that you think he is Peyton Manning 2.0, I'll push back on that a little bit, but it's in a limited sample size, a really promising return to see a guy play like that on that stage. And there's nothing that we've seen from him so far that suggests he can't be a star. And that is a great thing. We talk about hopium. Nico Iamaleava gave all sorts of hopium to Tennessee fans that have had what I felt like was a pretty hollow 8-4 season. Their best win was against 7-5 teams, and then you beat an Iowa
Mm-hmm.
team that was miraculously a 10-win team this year. And all of a sudden, you're like, okay, a blah offensive year. And now we feel like we have a future. That guy is going to make plenty of people on Rocky Top feel like there are some better, bigger days ahead.
Yeah, I think not to just keep dumping on Joe Milton, but I think that the roboticism, the roboticness of Milton versus the smooth, like just the way Iamaleava is, his presence, he feels like he has a calming presence. I don't know anything about this gentleman, I don't, but it feels like, when you're in the middle of a run, that Alabama run, this is a style of quarterback, a little bit of Hendon Hooker, where it's like I can actually kind of do some stuff here. I can change. Here's our game plan. Here's what's getting hit by. I can kind of do my own thing and bridge the gap. And it's not going to be based on the game script or the plays being called. It's going to be because I'm him. And I saw a little bit of that. Now, granted, hey, he's young. It's Iowa. I get it. But to your point, you see, like, it's one thing to have a big game. Like I said, not dumping on Tanner Mordecai. Anybody can have a big game, right? But when you say, okay, this is my first start, I'm playing this defense that has just been like we talked about, the record for the most wins with the worst offense was 4, and Iowa had 10. It's all because of this defense in the punting game. So to knock out both of those two things, the punting game, the field position, making a young quarterback make so many decisions in a game, that was their game plan, was we're going to make him make all these decisions. He's like, you know what? Awesome. I've been studying for this test. Like you just said.
35 points. And
Yeah.
Brock Osweiler, dude, be aware of the over-under. Okay, before you're going to hate on Tennessee for running up the score, talk about classiness, be aware that the over-under was 36.5, and it's 35-0. Josh Heupel's throwing the ball in that spot and trying to be able to make sure that he gets all those people that are patting him on the back of the over. Come on, we know where this is going. Have a little bit of sense for the moment. ESPN Bet, shout out ESPN Bet. Just be aware. That's all I ask for.
I was about to say, now y'all care about the beauty, regionalism, and sportsmanship of college football, ESPN? That's crazy. Oh, no, y'all putting the betting lines on here. Now we care.
Kirk Ferentz would never do such a thing in that spot. He didn't say that, but that's kind of the way that it came out.
We never have 35 points, so correct.
Would not know. Would have no idea what that would even look like.
Yeah, accurate.
Unless they're playing Ohio State, and it's 5 years ago. But we don't need to get into that. The Iowa offense. Well, can we talk about this?
Sure, always.
I don't typically do this where I just sit here and read stats because anyone can do that. And I don't think that that's that entertaining to listen to, except as it relates to the Iowa offense. 0 points. 0 points, of course. Why did I think that they would score multiple times? Blunder on my part. 9 for 24 passing for 64 yards, 2.4 yards per passing attempt. Hard to do. 113 rushing yards, 3.1 yards per carry. 51 of which came from the fourth string quarterback that came in for the fourth quarter that Iowa fans were so sarcastically cheering for. It was great. It was awesome. He was a leading rusher, by the way. Of course he was. 2 for 15 on third down, 3 turnovers, 173 total yards. They doubled up in punting yards, Will. They had 360 punting yards in this game because, of course, why wouldn't they? After Iowa threw that pick in the end zone on the second drive, and I think I definitely said at Lauren, ball game. Here's the drive sequence and where they got to. The Iowa offense, the high-powered Iowa offense. Punt from their own 15, punt from their own 21, punt from their own 41, end of half. Punt from their own 10, punt from their own 29, fumble from their own 7. James Pierce, big sequence for him. Pick 6 from their own 49. James Pierce again there. Turnover on downs from the Tennessee 22. Turnover on downs from their own 34.
Yeah.
That team winning 10 games, Will. I know we've talked about it a lot. It's one of the all-time feats in college football history that we should never forget 2023 Iowa for being a Power 5 team to be that inept on the offensive side of the ball and to get to that place where they played in a Power 5 conference championship, Will.
Sure did.
I don't know, Iowa fans, and I've got many in my life. I don't know how they do it. My buddies have turned off the TV since early October. They refuse. They're like, I am not going to be.
This might be the best it's going to get, brother. This is an elite defensive punting unit. I hate to tell you that. This is way better than they were last year.
Oh God, it was so like Tennessee was so depleted in the secondary, and they would just have freshman corners on the outside. Iowa, in theory, should have a one-on-one matchup like Wisconsin was taking advantage of with LSU. And instead, they're like, you know what? No, let me throw to this tight end that's got like 3 guys draped around him. That's the better move. Let's go with that. Brian Ferentz. He died as he lived.
It's great because you have no one to blame but Kirk Ferentz, right? It's like, I don't feel sorry for him at all because he kept his son employed, but we've been joking about it for 3 years. It's like, dude, you literally cost yourself a chance. Not going to say they would have beaten Michigan and played for a national championship, but you had a chance to be a really special all-time team because I think they pretty clearly had, like I said, at least one of the best defenses and the best punter in America. Like, if you just played mid-average offense, like we talked about, it's not like Alabama and Jalen Milroe were like Heisman winners. Like, they just had a great physical defense. Same thing with Michigan. It's not like McCarthy was awesome last night. It was their defense. All you had to do was give your team a chance, Kirk Ferentz, and you were like, you know, my wife would yell at me if we fired old Brian, so I'm just going to sit on this one for a minute.
I don't think we had the best day for nepotism. It wasn't. The fact that Jay Harbaugh is the special teams coach of Michigan, and they had the day that they did. It was a
I got to learn about more Harbaughs now. I thought this was enough, especially with Crean married to one of them. What do you mean?
Yeah, no, he's been there since Jim got there as well. He's been on the staff for these 9 years. A really rough day for nepotism. Just an absolute shame to see that it came to a crashing halt the way that it did. But good for Tennessee, best win of the year. I am incredibly excited to watch this offense with Nico Iamaleava. Squirrel White coming back, I think. I badly want Brew McCoy to come back for another year. He still has another year of eligibility, even if he doesn't get the medical red shirt, which he played in 5 games before that injury, but he still has another year, so he could come back in theory. I hope he comes back. Dylan Sampson is super, super fun. I think Tennessee fans were really excited to get that guy a lot more run in this game. And James Pierce, if you're leaving him off of the preseason All-America team, if you're not even looking at him, you're doing a disservice because that guy is so freaking good, and he was excellent in this game. So good for Tennessee. Get to 9 wins. Once upon a time, consecutive 9-win seasons at Tennessee was a very far-off possibility, and they were able to get there this year. Should we let's go to the Gator Bowl. We got to get into the SEC losses. It only took us, an hour and 45 minutes into this pod to get into the SEC losses, at least the non-playoff ones. Clemson won this game where here's the only way to describe this, Will. You have that friend that you're with at the bar. Everything's going fine. nothing out of the ordinary, just a normal night out. You're kind of, you feel like you're at the same level as them. And then maybe you talk to someone else for 10 minutes or they go to the bathroom and you look over and you realize that they're somehow just blackout drunk. You're like, when did this happen? Wait,
Yep.
we're fine. We were just talking about meaningful things. You were putting full sentences together, and now you can't even walk. You can't even put one foot in front of the other. What are we doing here? That was this football game.
I love that you turn into Courage the dog at that moment. You good? You just water. Sorry, continue.
But this football needed a water. This football game absolutely needed a water. It was just 3 quarters of, okay, yeah, we're having a good time. It's kind of a fun little back and forth game. And then just a drunken blackout in the fourth quarter. A drunken blackout. 42 points scored in this fourth quarter, 5 turnovers, and 5 lead changes. Clemson won that game, and Kentucky basically treated it like a 5-year-old treats lima beans. Just get this out of here. Get this away. Don't want that on my plate. Bowl game victory? Don't want that. Here you go, dog. I'm just going to skip this to you. Get that out of here. Clemson deserves credit because it capitalized on just a mess of Devin Leary mistakes late in this one. The Barryon Brown fumble was weird, though it's hard to hate on a guy that was just a walking touchdown in this game, but so bad. So bad. Felt like the story of Kentucky's season. Moments of brilliance that made you wonder.
That guy's a box of chocolates. That guy.
You never know what you're going to get. There's a comp somewhere that I'm forgetting, that I'm blanking, where it's just every single time he touches the football, something really significant happens. And
yep.
I don't think it's fair to say Kadarius Toney, because I don't think Kadarius Toney, if you combine his college career and his NFL career, maybe that's it. But just in terms of like every single time, I mean, Josh Allen, that's not probably a fair comp because he's a quarterback. But you get what I'm saying. When he touches the football, look, because it's either going to the house, it's a turnover, it's a drop, it's some DPI, and then he's going to get, flagged for taunting or something. I don't know. Something significant is going to happen when Barryon Brown touches the football. That much I know. But yeah, I think Kentucky is easily one of the most disappointing SEC teams. One of the 3 most disappointing teams. You probably have to put Arkansas and Florida in that conversation. Maybe Mississippi State if you were high on them, like I was. Not as many people were high on them. But
A&M.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah, A&M. Yeah, okay, so Kentucky's the 4th most disappointing team in the SEC. And in any other year, they're probably even higher on that list. Deion Walker, though, is such a problem. And, man, that guy, I came into this season asking who would be the player in the SEC that resembled Jalen Carter the most. And I think it was Walker by season's end. He's incredible. He never leaves the field at 350 pounds. And he doesn't take plays off either, which is amazing. That guy just has such a bright future. But the future of this Kentucky offense, it's still going to rely heavily on Barryon Brown and Dane Key. And those guys putting it all together is going to be the key. They have moments where they look like they do. They have moments where they look like they just drop way too many footballs and make way too many of these mental mistakes. Kentucky's going to have a much different feel offensively with Vandegrift, but they still need mobility at that position, which I think he should bring to the table. And they just need a guy that's not going to have every other pass batted at the line of scrimmage, which that's kind of what it felt like when Devin Leary was at his worst. And you saw that too many moments in this game. Wild game. Were you watching this live in the fourth quarter as this was playing out?
Not the fourth quarter, because I thought it was over. But like, I will say this: it's like those 2 guys, Barryon Brown and Dane Key. It's almost like they're in like a buddy cop movie at this point, because they're going to be on like year 3 of the different like weird quarterback. Like they started with Levis, then they got Leary, then they're going to have Vandegrift, and they're both just so like electric, but also very flawed players. And it's just like, all right, guys, we're in version 3, volume 3 here. How's this one going to go? Because it's like, yeah, Vandegrift, same deal, 5-star quarterback, has a gun for an arm. Never seen him play. No idea what he's going to be. They could all put this together and be awesome next year, but they should have done it this year. None of it makes any sense.
Yeah, it's weird. It's really weird. And I like Vandegrift a lot and the potential in this offense, but you're still going to need those guys on the outside to step up and be a big time contributor in this offense on a more consistent basis and not have games where you just disappear. And obviously they need to be able to run the football more consistently. Ray Davis, as great as he was, the running lanes for him need to be improved. And there were still too many moments where it just felt like it was tough sledding and there wasn't running lanes created. That's really been the case the last 2 years. And we talked about it so much last season with Chris Rodriguez. It's Chris Rodriguez gets to the line of scrimmage, gets met, and then he pushes the pile forward 3 yards. And the yards are just so difficult to come by. So that area needs to improve. Would have been a nice win for Kentucky. Could have claimed ACC championship probably if you beat Clemson and Louisville to close the regular season. But instead, that doesn't happen. I don't want to hate on a coach for celebrating a bowl victory, because if there's ever one that's going to do it and not care what people think about him, it's Dabo. It's a little much at some points. It's a little much. And look, bowl games are fun. They're great. Dabo was like dropping to his knees and acting like there was a playoff berth on the line with some of these kicks and stuff. And I'm just like, I'm not here to hate on passion. I love passion. I support passion, but do we need to be getting to those levels in this game? I don't know. That's just an observation that I'm sure many people had watching this game play out the way that it did, wherein people were probably hoping to see Dabo upset instead of very happy and brought to his knees with joy.
Yeah, I feel like he kind of went through like an anime final form. He just like started seeing Tyler from Spartanburg chasing him, and he was like, I got to beat the final evil here. I got to power up. And by the end, he thought he won a national championship because he like psyched himself up. He's like, that's the big bad. There's Darth Vader. It's Tyler from Spartanburg.
Haven't lost since Tyler from Spartanburg got on the horn. Was he a player? Yeah. Some people are asking. You just never know. Clemson wins a national championship this year. Does Tyler from Spartanburg get a ring? Yes. Absolutely.
There you go. The call was coming from inside the house. It was like one of his football staffers that called him the show.
Look, people are hating on Lane for creating burners. Do we need to investigate Dabo? Maybe setting this up. Just saying, It worked effectively. Do what you can. All right, let's rip through these last two here. The Texas Bowl, which was roughly 6 months ago. A&M did its best to pull off a miracle against Oklahoma State. And if you just look at the spread and if you look at the final score, you'd say, what do you mean pull off a miracle? Jalen Henderson got hurt on the very first play of this game, where he landed awkwardly on his arm on a questionable hit. I'll leave it at that. Marcel Reed, who was the guy who flipped from Ole Miss to Texas A&M kind of at the 11th hour, the true freshman, he played his tail off for an A&M team that was missing 31 players. I think the final total was. A&M was down 18 at half and played well enough to be able to have a chance at a Hail Mary to try and tie this game. I thought they were left for dead. I was so impressed with A&M actually giving a crap and fighting in this game, because Oklahoma State looked like it had such a mismatch with those receivers on the outside bodying true freshmen. Talk about trusting receivers in man coverage. Oklahoma State was throwing balls that were hitting the roof. I mean, they were skyscrapers, these balls that were going up, and you're just every single time I would mentally say to myself, too high. To quote Major League, too high. What do you mean too high? That's not a thing. And Oklahoma State's receivers would just somehow come down with it, and clearly taking advantage of that. It looked like they were just playing a game of 500 the whole time. Will, did you play that game, 500? Is that a Midwest thing? Okay.
Oh, no, that was everywhere. The game was so electric, yeah. You never knew, yeah.
I felt like I suffered many injuries playing that game in the pool with my brother and cousins as a kid. A lot of scratching would go on in 500. Like, if you didn't leave there with some bumps and bruises, we were playing different games of 500. I'll just say that. You couldn't really play that on the street as well. It's kind of, as a game that's built for the pool, kind of, you just throw it up and go and get it. And when your brother goes up to try and jump and catch it, you pants him or something like that. Then it did not turn out well for me. I can promise you that.
Yeah, I think quick 500 thing, because that just unlocked part of my brain. That game was so funny as a kid's game looking back, because everybody played it the same way. Like the first couple were like, okay, 5, 10, and then everyone would just kind of be like, all right, man, get on with it. They'd be like, all right, 300. Yep. And it was just like the Super Bowl. It's like, bro, we don't do enough math. We got to space these out a little bit.
Yeah, like, I'm sick of catching this. Oh, then you got to do the math in your head. You're like, I have 345 right now. I just need a catch of 160 to be able to win. And then I get 300.
No, we don't need 3. No, we already got the other.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, any take about A&M lacking motivation? I think that should have been kind of ruled out with the way that they were able to hang in this one. Ollie Gordon, the second, way better than Ollie Gordon Jr. Ollie Gordon, the second, he matched the 29 touches that I laid out for the over-under for him in this one.
Mm-hmm.
So good on him for doing that. But yeah, I think the fact that A&M was able to somewhat contain him and didn't let that guy just run wild, that tells you where that defensive effort was. And you got Mike Elko in the house, and you're trying to play for your new coach, or you're trying to play for maybe improving your market in the portal if you're a guy that hasn't had a ton of reps just yet. So yeah, at one point in this game, A&M had 2 healthy scholarship receivers. 2. They still played as competitively as they did with the top 25 team. So yeah, close the book on the Jimbo Fisher era. It is officially over, and fitting because nobody liked losing away from home quite like the Texas A&M Aggies during the Jimbo Fisher era.
Yeah, it was just everybody's little gift. It was like a meet and 3. It was like just come in, well, anyway. So yeah, I will say this, like we talked about it, attrition, all that, how A&M is not kind of as cooked as, you would think, but because they had so many people leaving, but they also had so many talented players. And like we got a taste of that in this bowl game. They do have some young talent. They have some really talented guys on this roster, and it's bare enough to be remade in the coach's image pretty quickly. So this actually, this is kind of what you wanted for A&M, is that you can just rip off the Band-Aid. We always joke about like get those old dudes out of there. You're there. You have the guys that want to be there are there. You can get the other guys in the portal or through recruiting because you're loaded. You're gonna be fine.
Yeah, I came away actually feeling much better about A&M than at certain points down the stretch, and feeling like the Mike Elko should have some things to work with, despite the fact that they obviously have a ton of attrition in the portal. All right, let's end with the Music City Bowl. Will, if we actually just didn't talk about this game, do you think Auburn fans would care?
I think they would love it, actually. I think they're skipping it. I don't know who this segment's for. Probably Bama fans that are sad today.
Yeah, Bama fans need a little catnip. They're like, guys, come on, just give us this. You can't skip the Auburn game, too. It's been a rough enough morning for us. Auburn's 3 losses to close the 2023 season came from New Mexico State getting $1.7 million to whoop that you-know-what at Jordan-Hare, 4th and 31. And that's a play that they're going to be seeing forever, even when they close their eyes. And then getting totally dominated by Maryland with a backup quarterback. Yuck. Auburn needs a lot of things right now. A lot of things. They need a pulse, which they did not have in this game until very, very late. The good news is you got to a bowl game in year 1, and year 1 is over. So if you just look at it through that lens, you feel a little bit better about things. We don't judge year 1 coaches on this show. It's not what we're doing. But if Hugh Freeze runs it back with Peyton Thorne, I will very much judge a year 1 coach going into year 2, and I will think less of him. Hank Brown, I get it. He played well. Provided a spark, if you will. Very small sample size against a defense that wasn't exactly sending the kitchen sink late in a blowout. It also felt better because of how bad Peyton Thorne and Holden Geriner were. Geriner, by the way. Remember, it's Turner with a G. Geriner. I don't know what his future holds.
You'll need that one soon.
What was he, 1 of 6 for 8 yards? I don't know that we're going to be needing that one yet. I had somebody that wrote a story about me saying in the preseason that Holden Geriner wasn't a candidate to start. When I said that, I think like post spring. And I'm not trying to like hate on the kid. Like I hope he gets to play. I hope he gets an opportunity. But I was like, what are we doing here? If we're really if dismissing him is considered newsworthy, but that was like something an aggregator picked up, and I was like, okay, all right, my bad. Didn't mean to write the kid off. Hope he has a great career. Hope he proves me wrong. But probably hurt himself in this game. Had a chance to really kind of get some hopium going in his favor, and didn't necessarily do that. I don't like that Auburn hasn't gotten a portal quarterback as of this recording. I don't like that, Will. Freeze sounded committed to Peyton Thorne a couple weeks ago. And then after this game, he says it's completely open competition. I hate the post-spring quarterback edition. But the market right now is really thinned out. I mean, those dominoes fell. KJ Jefferson going to UCF, Cam Ward going to the NFL, TJ Uyunglele going to Florida State. I was kind of looking at it this morning, trying to figure out, man, who would I even like to see at Auburn with the market as it stands? I wish Casey Thompson could get another look, but he tore his ACL in September, so it's you're like not going to have him for those valuable spring reps. Diego Pavia, whatever. That name is worth knowing just because he's the New Mexico State quarterback that came into Jordan-Hare.
Ever heard of him?
Peyton Thorne. Yeah, Auburn fans.
That would
exactly
be funny if they ended up with him.
Dude,
actually, you guys had some things figured out. I'll be honest.
They might not touch that one. Little bit of ego at play. There was also a video of him that surfaced of him pissing on the New Mexico indoor facility logo.
Oh, wow. Okay,
rival behavior.
Cool.
Yeah. It's like everybody makes mistakes. That was the headline. I can't remember where I read that story, but I was like, I don't know if Auburn's going to touch that one. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I don't know. Malachi Nelson wants to have a starting job guaranteed. 5-star transfer from USC. Don't know that he's going to get that based on some of these comments with Hugh Freeze, but I'm bummed that I'm so pessimistic about the quarterback position for Auburn that I thought at this time going into year 2, I would feel better about. And I just do not really feel good about it. And also probably not the best look for Hugh Freeze, and probably something that's going to be mentioned for those recruiting against Auburn is the fact that Auburn just had 3 consecutive losing seasons for the first time since when, Will? When do you think?
Oh, man, it's going to be old, man. I'm going to guess Jimmy Carter.
It's always Jimmy Carter. Of course it's Jimmy Carter. Yeah, obviously. So, yeah, not the best way for Auburn to end the season.
Yeah, I think this just goes to show like just how unlikable of a person Brian Harsin was, because there's not really a way that you could measure this season as any way better than Brian Harsin's first season at all. I mean, you had a worse loss. You lost to New Mexico State. You somehow had a more heartbreaking loss to Alabama than the multiple overtime game that Brian Harsin lost. You looked like you didn't know offense. You had an underwhelming transfer quarterback, just like that year. But we're sitting here, and Hugh Freeze is a guy who had a massive scandal in the SEC. Is not thought of as a great guy, but he's just kind of not a jerk face like Brian Harsin. And I literally think, as I sit here, that like I feel much more optimistic about Ole Miss, even though nothing should tell me. Like when I sit there and like I'm trying to think about the positives, and the recruiting class is a big part of it. Right? You're talking about the 5-star receivers and everything, and that is a huge difference. But that being said, I mean, Harsin had Gus's talent. You know what I'm saying? There was definitely more talent on the roster. So maybe you look at it like that, and that Harsin walked into a better situation. But that being said, it's just like I agree with the masses. I'm going to buy the hopium just because, this is so weird because what's going on with Hugh Freeze, but it's like he feels like he's just a little bit more transparent about things, as funny as that sounds. Like it seems like when he screws something up, he's kind of like all shucks and at least a little bit more real about it. It's not like, oh, we got this all handled. It's like, we blew this bowl game because I'm focusing on recruiting, or like, oh, I'm not as great of a play caller anymore. Like maybe him just knowing how to talk to the media has made it better, but I don't know. I just feel like this game didn't really matter, and he knew it didn't really matter. He chose for it almost to not matter once it got off to a rocky start, I think. And I'm not making excuses. It's just there's nothing that I feel like as much as we talked about, Auburn is like a 5 or 6 win team, sitting here, it still feels disappointing because it feels like they should have beaten Alabama. The New Mexico State loss was not possible to think about. Like, so the way they got there, as long as we talk about, and this is like an all-time bad way to get there, but it just kind of doesn't matter because of recruiting, and feels like Hugh Freeze like kind of gets it a little bit more, which is insane to say. I don't know.
Their only win against a bowl team, against a Power 5 bowl team. Oh, no, wait, just a bowl team in general. Because UMass came up just short of that 3-9 UMass that we talked about at length. Shout out Mizzou for playing them next year on the road.
Of course,
their only win against the bowl game was Cal, a game that Jade Knott got hurt in the fourth quarter, and they barely won. I don't think anybody left that game feeling like, oh my god, the ceiling was just raised considerably. If you're an Auburn fan in year 1, 3 SEC wins all came against teams that didn't go to a bowl game. So it's kind of tough to sell that like your best games were close losses. Close losses against Georgia and Bama. Like that's the positive spin, but just an ugly way for this game that just never felt particularly close. And that's not what I expected to see from an Auburn team that I thought was going to have a little bit more fight on the defensive side of the ball and not be such a doormat. But they got a lot of issues to be able to figure out. Yeah, at least I got those bowl practices though. There's value in that. There's value in that. There's your positive spin, Auburn. Okay, that'll do it. Wow, that's a 2-hour pod from us. Recap. We had a lot to get to, man. Whole lot to get to. If you have not listened to a Betting the Bowls episode, do yourself a favor. Go back and listen. Listen to all those episodes. Watch them on YouTube as well. Get our numbers up. Appreciate it. Also, listen to the National Championship one because we're going to break down all the different props that are going to be coming out for this game. We're going to talk about spread. We're going to talk about a lot of different angles. Those episodes, as I've said each and every week throughout bowl season, don't have to subscribe or anything like that. They are just there in your feed. If you've been listening to those, hopefully you've enjoyed them. Hopefully you haven't lost money listening to us, to myself, to Marler, to Bob Winkle as well. But have had a lot of fun doing those. One more to be able to preview the national championship from us, the bonus content coming from Saturday Down South. If you have not, leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast, which is presented by Texas Beat. Follow us on the app, formerly known as Twitter, at the SDS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.